your seats, please. Guys, I think we're going to make a start. Good evening, everyone. Happy Halloween. Welcome to the Children and Young People Scrutiny Commission meeting. This is a formal meeting of Hackney Council, and all of the usual constitutional requirements of council meetings apply. Can I remind members and officers that this meeting is being held in public and is being broadcast live via the internet. The rights of the press and public to record and film the meeting apply. There is a bit of an echo, so I'm not sure if people can, who are on remotely, everybody's on mute. Okay. Apologies. So the rights of the press and public to record and film the meeting apply, and everyone present should note that media representatives are in fact in attendance this evening and may be viewing via the live stream. So moving on to item 1, apologies for absence. We have apologies from Councillor Ross. Councillor Sizer is connecting virtually. Do we have any other apologies?
Yeah, we have apologies from Councillor Lee, Lord Scott, Councillor Troughton, which will be entering, coming late, Monique Pink, and Councillor Selman, I think, is connecting virtually as well.
Thank you very much. Item 2, so urgent items, order of business. The outcome of the focus visit by Ofsted, which took place in September, was published on the 26th of October. Unfortunately, this was too late for inclusion within this agenda. Therefore, the Commission has asked the Group Director for Children and Education and the Director of Children's Social Care for a very brief verbal update to highlight key outcomes from this Ofsted assessment and the service response. This will be taken after item 4. Moving on to item 3, declarations of interest. Do members have declarations of interest that they wish to share? Jo.
Governor, it's Thomas Abney School and parents of a child with SEND.
Anya?
Parent of a child with SEND.
Do we have any others from members? No. In which case, we're moving on to our first substantive item, item 4. Childhood food poverty, free school meals, accessibility and uptake. From local data, we know that almost half of local children are living in poverty, and after housing costs have been taken into account. Taking the current cost of living crisis into consideration, it is clear that poverty and food insecurity will have a significant impact on local children and families, and for the local services that support them, including local schools and education settings. The aim of this item is to help understand the nature of childhood food hunger challenges faced by schools, their response to identify, if necessary, how additional support can be provided. In particular, the Commission is looking at free school meal entitlement and uptake, the reach and focus of school breakfast clubs, and how schools are connected to wider food poverty programmes and networks. A short report on free school meals entitlement is provided at page 11 of the agenda pack. For this item, I would like to welcome Paul Senior, the Director of Education, and the heads of a number of local primary and secondary schools who are going to talk about the challenges of childhood food poverty and how their schools have responded. So we have Jenna Clark, Executive Head Teacher at Gainsborough, Louise Nichols, the Executive Head of Gayhurst, Kingsmead and Mandeville Primary Schools, and from secondary schools we have our 2 co-opted members, although I don't believe Richard is here just yet. So we have Andy English, who is the head teacher of Our Lady Secondary School, and hopefully Richard Brown will be joining us at some point. So thank you all for attending. We really do appreciate you contributing towards this item for us and sharing with us your experiences on this really important item. To support the scrutiny process and to further inform members' understanding of this policy area, members of the Commission visited a number of local primary and secondary schools and food projects ahead of this meeting. These visits were really informative and helpful, and we would like to extend our thanks to all those schools and food projects who hosted our visits. We have just over 70 minutes for this item, and we're going to start with a short summary from Hackney Education. Then we will move on to our head teachers, who will provide a very brief summary of what has been happening in their respective schools. So we'll go through, I think, Gainsborough first, and then Kingsmead, Mandeville and Gayhurst, Our Ladies, and then Urswick, just in time, Richard. So and then we'll have about 40 minutes for questions and answers and some discussions with members and contributors. Can we start with Paul Senior, please?
Now we have the magic. Thank you, Chair. And thank you all, colleagues who are supporting this conversation and this process. I welcome this conversation and the opportunity for us to engage collectively as a system on this, because when we look at the food poverty and education agenda, it's important that as a local area we work collectively to make best use of what resources we have and to see what's working, what's not working, whilst at the same time having regard to practice going on in our neighbouring local areas. The Deputy Mayor, Councillor Bramble, as hopefully colleagues may well be aware by now, if not, just to let you know, has commissioned a task group which will focus on coming up with a series of recommendations and proposals to inform the work of an upcoming summit with a focus on food poverty in education. We're fortunate that we have a number of schools working locally who've really come up with some helpful, innovative solutions, and then we know we have some of those schools here tonight to talk about what they do. And we're very keen that when we talk about the work of the task group, that are, if you like, our system leaders, those schools who are well positioned, and not just school leaders, but chefs, as well as partners and stakeholders and providers, will be an important part of this conversation. So over the coming days, I will formally be inviting colleagues, some here tonight and across the wider local area, to engage and support the work of our task group that will come together to share what works in Hackney in terms of comparing and contrasting practice, look at what's going on in our neighbouring local areas as well, and look at where we can learn from practice locally, as well as regionally, as well as nationally. What it comes down to, we will have some tough decisions to make. We recognise the correlation between those at most at risk of poor outcomes. How well can we support our most vulnerable children, young people, and families through such a difficult time, through making best use of what resources we have, and being creative and innovative in such difficult times. So, as I've said, we will be commissioning this task group that's going to be consisting of local head teachers, council officers, partners from health, chefs, and other local stakeholders to be part of this conversation to really try and work together. And we know there are a number of range of activities. There are a range of measures already in place that work. So how can we deploy what works, extend on what works? And for example, when we have our head teacher briefings and our Senko briefings, it's sharing that good practice, what works in schools and settings already in this regard, sharing learning from other areas as well, and not just focus on food poverty and education, but some of the other measures as well. So this is as part of an overarching framework of activity that's been undertaken with a focus on the cost of living crisis. Food poverty and education isn't just about what's going on in our schools, obviously early year settings, post-16 settings, right across the system. So it's important that the Hackney response looks at all parts of the education system, how best we can work together to meet the needs of children, young people, and families during such a difficult time. You have a paper in front of you which sets out a set of measures, and it's got lots of data, lots of narrative in there. So that's helpful, but really this is just the beginning of the conversation, Chair. This is just the beginning of the conversation and the beginning of an ongoing series of conversations I'll be expecting over the coming weeks and months with partners as we work together to close the gap. So what I would expect as we get into the work of, into the new year, once the task group has met, once the summit has come together to co-produce proposal solutions, we'll have something tangible to share as a set of recommendations to go over and beyond what we're already doing, and how we can actually maybe build on capacity with a focus on what's really working in our local schools. But I'm really pleased that we've got education system leaders here tonight who are really at the coalface, really driving some positive initiatives in their schools and settings to help progress this agenda, because this is an important part of the local approach, which has been led by our local school leaders, and that's great. So as a council, we've got lots going on. So I suppose that introduces the paper, Chair, gives an overview of our intentions and next steps, and a commitment to come back to this forum to update on progress with the work of the task group, which will lead into the work of a summit with this focus. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. And now handing over to Jenna Clark from Gainsborough.
Hi. I'm just going to give you a bit of background on the decision we made to introduce universal free school meals at Gainsborough. So several years ago, we faced falling role with an academy opening close to the school and other challenges in the Hackney Wick area. We had to make a decision of what our USP was going to be for our school, what was the driver for us to recruit more children, and we weighed up financial implications of advertising, of spending money on different resources and interventions. And what we decided was, with the cohort that we served with high SEND need, high looked after children need, high cases of children with child protection need, and roughly 50% free school meals, we were spending a lot of time demanding money from families and bringing about quite a negative relationship and impact. And there was a percentage of families that were unable to afford the meals. So we decided to do two things. One was offer free school meals throughout the school. And that worked out to be roughly 120 meals at first, and what the cost of that was. And we also offered free full-time 30-hour nursery to all children. We've recently stopped that because we were serving a demographic that didn't necessarily need that. So we've reduced that back to only those that do need it. However, the free school meals, we have maintained that offer to all pupils, and that was to ensure that families were supportive, to embrace the community that we served and to be positive, to ensure that our interactions with families were always positive, and that we were doing something that helped our community with children's progress and attainment. So instead of doing interventions for those that were having a bad time, we were looking at the step before that and making sure children were being fed, were supported, were happy before they came into school, and then looking at what we needed to put in, not waiting for them to fall behind and then putting intervention in. We sought our governor's support, who still support that we offer this to all our families. We also did a costing exercise looking at the time and energy we spent chasing debts and hassling families for money, and we changed that approach to the admin time that people would have spent looking for families for the free school meal payment, for the payments for meals. We turned that into time spent supporting families to apply for free school meals, and that was a big shift because our percentage increased. We also increased the cost of staff meals. So actually staff were enjoying a healthy meal, a much bigger portion, and the cost went up for them. That worked really, really well. So that was funding a proportion of the free school meals that we were serving the children. And currently we have a free breakfast club offer that is supported by Magic Breakfast. And we work with a charity who do a food drop monthly of ready-made meals, and families are aware that they're there for collection. I think the cost of doing free school meals universally to the school is around £20,000 a year when we last looked at the analysis of not getting that money from the families. And moving forward, we have just won a bid with a partner organisation to run a circular food project. So we hope that we will be able to grow our own food and provide for our community a cooperative that over time should be self-sufficient, and the fruit and veg that we grow should be able to be used in the kitchen. So again, that should save some money. So feel free to ask any questions.
Thank you so much, Jenna. Really, really helpful. I think we'll hear from the other heads first, and then we'll move over to questions, if that's okay. I might just let Deputy Mayor Bramble come in, because I know that she was late joining. I'll give you a couple of minutes. I'm trying to be strict with the agenda this evening. Oh, I think you're frozen. Oh, you're back.
Yeah, no, just to say this is important work, and welcome the work that Scrutiny are doing on this. And one of the things that the Mayor and I are doing are establishing a task and a food poverty summit to look at ways that we can support families and children in schools. Of course, part of that will be exploring free school meals, but more the broader offer in terms of how we can support family in our response to food poverty. So it's really interesting hearing from schools that actually they did have the free school meal offer, but then didn't want to offer it because there are a group of parents that can pay and are willing to pay, and anything that we would want to explore would be able to include options like that where families that can and will want to donate can donate. But again, just thanking you for Scrutiny for taking this focus lens, and the schools that are working really hard to provide free school meals. I can see Richard there, and I know that he provides free school meals for all of the children in his school. And I've been speaking to some heads as well, Chair, on what this looks like and what that feels like for individual schools. So I'll pause there. Thank you so much, Chair, for the time.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bramble. I'm now going to hand over to Louise Nichols, who is joining us online. Welcome, Louise.
Hello. Hi, thank you, Chair. Can you hear me all right? Yep. Good. Excellent. Sorry, I had some problems with my microphone earlier. Okay. Yes, I would back up much of what Jen has just told you. We also went to all free school meals, a universal free school meal offer at Mandeville in 2018 for many of the same reasons as Jenna has just outlined for Gainsborough. So two schools in very similar situations. Mandeville is situated in the Kings Park ward. Kingsmead is a neighbouring school, is also one of my schools, and also has very high FSM. So we're talking about those schools have around about 60% FSM, give or take 1% either way, very high. So then when you look at the rest of the children in the school, you're looking at around about 40% who aren't qualifying, but those families are just above the threshold to qualify for free school meals. And I think that's really important to remember in all of this work that Gainsborough are doing, and Kingsmead and Mandeville and other schools who've got very high levels of deprivation. I've got the contrast to report on as well, in that if we look at, in referring to what Councillor Bramble just said about the fact that there are going to be parents who can afford free school meals, because although I'm very strongly in favour of UFSM offers for all children, I'm aware that one of the counter arguments will be that some parents can afford it. And what we found and what can happen is that parents who can afford are happy to make donations of the money that they would have got. So where UFSM has been paid for by the government, as everyone knows, for reception year 1 and year 2 for quite a few years now, many parents, for example at Gayhurst, pay the money that they would have paid for their lunches, and that money is paid and donated back into the school, and we use it to fund things like free after school clubs, free breakfast club for other children. So schools are very good at moving these amounts of money around. I was just going to say, in general, all three of my schools have breakfast clubs. Kingsmead is the only one that actually offers completely free, and as a result has a much higher take up than the other two. So it has about 80 to 85 children, which is a one-form entry school. So that's a high number of children coming in on a daily basis for free breakfast. We're also supported by the charity Magic Breakfast for that, but there is a charge for schools for that now. And I think that has made breakfast a much harder thing for us to support in general. We're still doing it, but you've got to add staffing and you've got to add those food costs, and that does make it quite difficult for schools. After school clubs, we provide 2 after school clubs in all of our schools per week for children who are on free school meals. That comes at a cost as well. So those things are going on in schools all across the borough. We're not unusual in that, and there is a fair spattering of the schools now who are providing free UFSM across the school. My argument, like Jenna's, would be that it doesn't actually cost that much when you boil it down to what is left after you take away UFSM children and you take away your 60% who are already entitled to free school meals. You're left with not that huge a percentage. And in Hackney, because we've got high free school meals, that means that we should really be keeping pace with our neighbouring boroughs. We have a number of boroughs around us who offer UFSM already and have done for some time. And that will also be affecting another issue in Hackney, which is to do with the falling roll. And if you're a family that lives on the border with Islington or with Tower Hamlets and they're offering universal free school meals, there's an issue there. And that's affecting us in schools. We also provide a weekly free food shop, which started during the pandemic, which through our partnership with the Felix Project. And so every week food is dropped off at the school. We run it's not means tested, but it's a free shop for food. It's held in the playground once a week in the afternoon, and any parent can come to that. And the reason we did that was because we wanted to get rid of any stigma, because we knew during the pandemic, people coming and saying, oh, there's hampers for free school meal children. A lot of families didn't want to queue up and be in the free school meal queue. So we offer a free food shop for all children and all families, because we don't want this to attach to a stigma. And to go back to my point before about the fact that many of our families are just above the threshold, and they're the ones that are really struggling in low paid work, going out, their childcare costs are prohibitive, their free school meals are prohibitive, and we're seeing the impact on those kind of families. And lastly, I'll just round up. I could probably talk about this for ages, but I won't. Lastly, I just want to say speed is quite important with all these things. We're up for a really hard winter, and I think all of us in schools can see it starting to bite, especially those of us who serve areas of high deprivation. And I know the council are really, I really welcome this commission, because to be honest, we really need to be doing something quite urgently, I believe.
Thank you very much, Louise. I really appreciate it. Now, handing over to Andy from Our Ladies, please.
Thank you very much. Just to give you some context of our school, we're a small girls-only school in Stamford Hill, and we have a high number of disadvantaged students. But the school remains highly effective in terms of student achievement. First, I'd like to welcome the task force that is being commissioned by the Deputy Mayor to look at food poverty in education in Hackney, as indicated by Paul, as this is a shared challenge that needs to be addressed by all stakeholders. Financial constraints have prevented our school from offering universal free school meal at this time. We, however, encourage parents who are entitled to free school meals to apply for this benefit, and we do signpost them to the application forms on the Hackney Education website. And I understand that some years ago, it was you, Richard, who fought for the paper version to remain, because it was a bit complicated for our families to fill out the electronic form. So that also helps. We operate a free breakfast club, and it's open to all students every morning from 7:30 to 8:30 a.m. And this is held in the school canteen, which is supervised. The space is also used concurrently as a study space, and students typically complete unfinished work or home learning after having breakfast. Typically, we have 60 to 80 students accessing the provision each morning, representing more than 10% of the school population. Students normally would be given a fruit, cereal, and sometimes pastries, and a hot drink. And funding for this was derived from a successful £11,000 one-time bid to Allen and Overy, a law firm, and another £1,000 we received from Kellogg's. These are not recurring subsidies, so you can see the challenge that we face, and therefore we've had to absorb the cost once those external funding streams have run out. The school has also joined the National Schools Breakfast Program, run by Family Action, which enables the school to order bagels and cereal at 75% reduced cost to provide breakfast. We offer after-school clubs, one which we call Study Zone, targeting Year 11 students as they prepare for their GCSEs, and snacks are provided. As you are aware, the food inflation is very high, and other inflationary pressures on energy and staff costs make it challenging to sustain this program. So we continue to actively seek other partners to ensure the program's continued viability. Other actions the school has taken to support those suffering food poverty include, well, not just food poverty, but poverty in general, is our uniform scheme. We encourage students to donate uniforms they no longer need so that they may be given to students in need. We are presently working with a charity that provides food and hygiene packs once a term, which are then distributed to families in need. Typically, we will distribute 40 to 60 food and hygiene packs each term. So our main challenge remains funding. We have sought to keep the cost of school dinners low. It remains at £2.10 for a meal deal. It's a drink and a hot meal. I think that's perhaps the lowest among schools in Hackney. Our sixth form students, they support a local soup kitchen run by St. Ignatius Catholic Church to prepare meals for other members of the community, in particular refugees from Ukraine. What do we need? Obvious, more funding, but also just for the local authority, just a commitment that the HAF, the Holiday and Activities Funding Program, continues, ensuring that young people are fed during the summer school, and that has been welcomed by schools in Hackney, and we hope that you're able to continue that program into the future. Our FSM families receive vouchers every holiday from the Household Support Fund, and it would really be helpful, and it would save a lot of worry for families if schools could be provided with clarity regarding the continuation of this well before the holidays. So my question is there any way schools can be assisted by the local authority in securing better value for money in terms of food purchase? Because the cost of buying food for the canteen is rocketing, and our canteen manager has to make certain decisions about what food items need to be bought in because of the rapid rising costs. And I just wondered if there was any sort of a purchasing platform that is available to schools where we can keep prices down. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andy. And lastly, Richard, please.
It's that one. There we are. Can sort out preschool meals, but can't use the microphone. Thank you very much for this opportunity. 8 years ago, Urswick introduced universal free school meals across the school, and we are a secondary school of about 900 students. And 8 years ago, we were celebrated by the BBC and in Parliament as being the first school in England to do it. And as far as I'm aware, 8 years later, we're still the only secondary school in England doing it. And I rather hope that there might be scenarios where other people could catch on. And the balance, as Louise Nichols said, between free school meal entitlement and non-free school meals who the school ends up funding, in effect, is an important part of this, and I don't shy away from it. So our free school meal entitlement is 70%, 70%, which is the highest in London. So in effect, we are having to fund the other 30%. And as various colleagues have said earlier, some of the issues around that are that people are just above the line of eligibility and they are still really struggling to feed their families. And equally, there are people sometimes below the line for various reasons either can't or won't claim for free school meals. We have now sorted out the issue of no recourse to public funds, but that was a strong motivating factor when the governing body at Urswick started to do this, because we were aware that there were youngsters living in significant poverty who had no recourse to getting a free school meal every day. I suppose some of this is also my lived experiences, because at secondary school I was on free school meals, and I remember having to line up in a separate queue and being given a little voucher, and you had to give the voucher to the cook, and then you got your free school meal, and there were others in a queue on the other side of the hall who didn't have to do any of that stuff. So I suppose we've always looked to maximise educational opportunity, social mobility, and at the same time try not to make economic inequality a factor in education. And so that's why, for me, the universal offer is so important. How do we fund it? Well, we are right in the centre of Hackney. We have a very rare thing in the centre of Hackney. It's called a car park. And what that means is that our lettings is actually very advantageous to us. So outside of COVID times, we've pretty much funded the free school meals for the additional 30% by the evening and weekend lettings that we do as a school. And I'm pleased to say that that income is picking up again. So in effect, one of the dilemmas and decisions, a bit like Andy was talking about earlier, is that you don't want to take money that you know needs to be used for good educational reasons and take that money. But if you can find other sources of income and other ways of looking at that, then I think that's really important to do it. We've always prided ourselves on producing good quality school lunches as well. And I know some members of the Commission came and had lunch with us the other week and hopefully enjoyed the lunch. And we use a company called Harrison Catering for our school meals. What they tell me is that our cost per head on food is probably the highest of any of the schools that they run a contract for. But our cost per head on staffing is actually the lowest, because of course you exploit economies of scale. And if you're making X amount of shepherd's pie, you can make X amount plus 30%. And really it's only the cost of the ingredients that you have to fund. It's not additional staffing, because it does take the same amount of time roughly to prepare and the same amount of time roughly to cook. And so I think that's important. The other thing, as was alluded to earlier, there is now no need to have a complicated administrative structure all around the people paying for lunches, chasing up debt, and all of those sort of things. And in fact, the scheme was sufficiently popular that we extended it to our sixth form, and we did that at a time when the EMA was being cut. And it was definitely a big factor in some of our more disadvantaged youngsters staying on at school and joining our sixth form, whereas perhaps in other times they might have been more lured into the world of work of whatever sort. So for us, it's had lots of benefits. It's been going so long now that there is actually no child in the school who has ever paid for a school lunch. And I'm really proud of that. But it is possible, but there are compromises and choices that had to be made. The Commission quite rightly said to me, for example, that the choice is less. Because again, if you're going for economies of scale, you're looking to reduce the amount of choice, but maximise the amount of uptake. And most of our youngsters will have a hot meal every day. Some of them choose to take a sandwich. There's an unlimited amount of salad pots available and fruit pots and things like that. So we are trying to promote healthy eating. It is not a sort of pasta-heavy diet, if you like, which we all know is the cheapest ingredient for a free school lunch. We do try to balance it. And the other thing about what we do is staff can also have a free lunch, provided they eat it with the children. And again, because there is no such thing as a free lunch, but again, the reason for that is it brings together people, and that act of breaking bread and sharing food together can also be a powerful force for good within a school context. So what is there not to like? It's just about helping maybe some schools work out how to do this, looking at the kitchen capacity of other schools, and as some of my colleagues have said earlier, maybe looking at how we can offset and reduce the cost of food ingredients, potentially by bulk buying and other creative solutions. And I would say this is a real pitch to the secondary school sector, because a lot of primary schools have got some variation of a scheme which is providing significant benefits. As Andy said, it is less likely to be happening in the secondary sector. And as far as I know, the average price of a school lunch across all the Hackney schools, secondary schools, would be anything between £2.10 and £2.50. which if you've got more than one child in secondary schooling and you're just above that line of eligibility for free school meals, is a significantly difficult problem. And my final point is to support Andy's comment about the importance of gaining clarity around the future provision of meal vouchers during school holidays. We knew only 2 weeks ago that that was going to be funded for the October half term. My parents in particular really noticed the difference in the holidays when they are having to, in effect, feed their children throughout the day and in the evening. And so anything that we can do to provide greater planning around this and greater notice of, for example, whether these vouchers will be available even at Christmas, it's not yet clear to schools. And I really hope that this will be something that could be resolved very quickly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Richard, and to all the other contributors. Before I hand over to the Commission, I had one question I really wanted to ask Jenna that I think might help some of the questions that the Commission might have going forward. But you'd mentioned, Jenna, that after you introduced the universal free school meals and you used the sort of administrative time that had been previously spent sort of chasing unpaid school dinner money, that you saw an increase in the number of children who were claiming free school meals. I just wondered if you could tell us what that difference was.
So we used the administrative time to meet with families and talk to them about completing the forms and support those who maybe couldn't do that themselves.
And did you notice much of an increase?
Yeah, I can't remember exactly the number now, but I think we saw about a 10% increase. And now it's very much part of our administrative process. We're much better at when a child joins at 3 or further on, of making sure all the forms are done. And I think the administrative staff and other people recognise the value in doing that.
Thank you very much for that, Jen. I just thought it might help to inform some of the questions that we have going forward. And I wondered whether this might be a good opportunity, actually, Paul, for you to maybe answer the question that Andy and Richard had put, if you have an answer at all about the holiday vouchers, the HAF programme and Household Support Fund. I don't know if you have.
The Holiday Activity Fund is a government-funded initiative, and we understand there's been some assurances provided about Christmas and Easter, but we haven't been given assurances as of the next summer holiday period as yet. So I'm sure local conversations will take place with colleagues how best we implement and progress that. But it is not a local development. It's for 151 local authorities nationally. Funding is made available. So our role is to work with partners to administer that as most effectively as possible. And listening to those stories, we've got some incredibly entrepreneurial heads and skills. And when we look at sustainable measures, and when you look at some of the stories going back a number of years, such as what Richard has shared with us, being the first school in the country to achieve that in the secondary status, and Jenna, your approach around self-sustainable models, I'm very keen that when we look at the work of the task group, we ensure that we're using this local expertise as much as possible to shape up our solutions, but also at the same time thinking how well we can share these experiences, these stories, these approaches, these models with other local education system leaders as well. So all 4 of you will be invited to speak at our future heads briefings as well, because I think these are important key messages that we look to cascade and help develop the wider system. So we know there are different approaches required in the primary sector, the secondary sector, but there's some key ingredients that clearly what works that we can share as well. So I'm very keen that we cascade that as well. But coming back to the Holiday Activity Fund, absolutely, we know the impact has been really, really positive. And looking at the numbers, and 70 different settings across the summer holiday period across Hackney, we're actually providing meals. And we know that 40% of Hackney's children accessing free school meals in the summer, and it's 40%. But we're accessing, we still need to do more to increase that number, but we know it was a valuable outlet, it was a valuable provision for those children during such a period as well. So we've got some clear targets and some clear objectives, and listening events like tonight are very, very helpful as part of our process. So it does take a local area system-wide approach, and as I say, our colleagues in education are part of the local solution when we talk about child poverty, and poverty in education as well as part of the overall local area cost of living crisis response.
Thank you, Paul. Now handing over to the Commission for questions, and if we could try and theme them if possible, starting with questions around free school meals, we'll then move on to school catering, breakfast clubs, and then connection to wider food programmes. So I've got Councillor Gordon. Do I have any other questions? Councillor Turbot-Deloff and Councillor Binny Lubbock. If you don't mind, Paul, if you've got a pen and paper handy, I'm going to try and take a couple of questions at a time, if that's okay. And many of them, I'm sure, will be directed at you, but others may be at the heads who have joined us today. So Councillor Gordon and then Councillor Turbot-Deloff, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, obviously, having heard from our heads, you know, the examples of what's happening at fantastic examples of what's happening in this space at individual schools, I just really want to take a bit of a step back from my question, really in respect to sort of the bigger picture. So there's guidance that the quality and nutritional standards for school meals. I understand it's national guidance. It'd be good if Paul could give us a little bit more information about that and how it's applied, and that school governors are responsible for these standards being maintained in their respective schools. So I just really wanted to know how much oversight we have as Hackney Education in relation to the quality of schools, and how much work has been done, you know, sort of across the landscape, really, to sort of by Hackney Education to encourage collaboration and, you know, encourage best practice between the schools, and make sure that the schools are, you know, sort of sufficiently empowered at all levels, including the governors and management, to, you know, innovate in this space and also, you know, access the best practice. And also the inspection and maintenance standards. I'd like to hear a little bit more about the responsibilities we have as a local authority and how those are applied, really, and how we, you know, what responsibility we take as a local authority, really, to ensuring standards, and whether there's any collaboration with the public health department. So that's a lot of questions, but really I broadly want to know what oversight we have as a local authority in relation to this and how much we encourage collaboration. Sorry, that was too long.
I'll leave you with that one, Paul. I think it might be a bit ambitious to give you a couple at a time.
That's a very, very comprehensive, thorough question. And in order to make sure you got an appropriate answer and response to that, I'll happily take that away and make sure that the best positioned colleagues across the local area can provide you with a detailed response into such a detailed question. I'm not going to try and give you a half-cocked answer. I think it's important that a question like that warrants a suitable, in-depth, comprehensive response. So we will take that away and ensure you get a response accordingly.
Thank you, Paul. Councillor.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe if we could just have a little bit information, possibly from our heads, really, about what schools are doing in order to sort of monitor the quality. Actually, maybe we can just have a little bit of information about that, and if there is any sort of input from the local authority. I mean, obviously a comprehensive answer will be welcomed, but I mean, it would be good to have a little bit of information in the public arena now on that. Thank you.
Louise has put her hand up. So Louise, did you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I was just going to refer to something that might help some of the secondary colleagues who were talking as well about purchasing agreements and those kind of things. There's a charity called Chefs in Schools who are focusing entirely on trying to improve school food, but as a result also been heavily involved in the campaign. And that charity started in Hackney. And one of the things they do is they help school kitchens. They encourage schools to bring their catering in-house, because although some schools prefer to outsource, it is effective to bring it in-house and upskill the kitchen staff. That's the way the format that we've used in our school, and we've managed to reduce the cost of meals. I think there's a huge variation. I think in terms of what you're talking about with reach, there's a huge variation in provision in Hackney schools, because some are using outside catering companies, some are in-house, some are charging. There's a whole range of FSM prices, of school meal prices, from about £1.65 is the cheapest currently to £3 across Hackney, and that's just luck of the draw as to what your school charges, which I think is something that does need some joined up thinking about it. But what chefs in schools can do for schools in terms of purchasing power, there are apps in relation to my colleague from Our Ladies. There is an app that the school kitchens can use, which provide that day's seasonal best price for example, broccoli, or that week's, or whatever. And there are quite a lot of new technology things that are being brought into schools via the charity chefs in schools. They're free for schools to use. They're not for profit, and they will help and support schools who want to broaden their offer, join together with other schools potentially. And in terms, I don't know if this is relevant, but in terms of the HAF, for example, we grouped together as a group of schools in the Kings Park ward and shared meals. Only had one kitchen running, but it provided the meals for 4 or 5 different organisations in the Kings Park ward, both schools and community groups. So I think there is that kind of practice going on across the borough, but it could do with more coordination.
Jenna, please, and can I just ask, it would be helpful for us to also know about the quality assurance and sort of what support you get around that and where you get that from. But please come in, Jenna.
I can answer a little bit of the question. In terms of using chefs in schools, they do check the nutritional standards for every meal that's cooked. And their expertise lies within bringing the community and the staff into the kitchen, which has made a huge difference to what the children eat, and how staff are involved in encouraging better and healthier choices. There's also an organisation called Education Health Partnership, which is run by somebody who used to work for Hackney Education, and they come and check your nutritional standards and various health and safety inspections in the kitchen. And I would imagine that all schools have access to that organisation and probably buy in to that if they have in-house catering. Another thing that we do as a federation of 8 schools, Primary Advantage, we work together to provide meals in the holidays. So different schools will cook at different periods of time to make sure that our preschool provision have fresh, healthy, nutritionally well-made meals, and that will be for different schools across Hackney, sharing the catering, sharing resources and expertise.
Thank you very much for that, Jenna. Did you want a follow-up, or?
Very briefly, Chair, thank you so much. Yeah, so if I've understood that, it's you as an individual responsibility on schools, particularly explicitly on the governors. Is that right? To maintain the quality, and that you make individual choices in the terms of the advice you get to fulfil that duty, and there's no particular interaction with the Education Authority in relation to that? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm just really trying to see who's taking responsibility for this on a local level. I know that Paul's promised to come back on that, but it may just be, to have an initial indication of how that's working would be really helpful. Thank you.
I think, Louise, did you want to come in on this?
Yeah, only to say that there are national food standards for schools, which we have to comply with.
Yes. How do you comply with that?
Sorry, Louise, just wondering how are schools making those choices? Is that on a school by school basis?
On a school by school basis. I think school meals are not governed. I don't know if Paul will agree with this, but I don't think the local authority get very involved with how school meals are managed. And that's what I meant about the pricing, about the quality, about whether they're outsourced or insourced. I think those are individual schools' decisions. They're not done on the local authority level.
Paul, did you want to come in?
Can I reiterate that the local authority has no jurisdiction, as our colleague has shared there? In terms of the point that's been made about, can we create an environment through purchasing power at scale? I think that's something that the task group will definitely be looking at. Can we build on the good practice that we've heard about tonight? That's already in place across our local area system. Why wouldn't be? I think in such a time, even if it wasn't the cost of living crisis, I think it's incumbent on us to look at for a collegiate approach. How can we share what works locally, strengthen it, build on it, and actually maximise the impact of that? So absolutely, Andy, you made the point about, can we scale this? Can we scale this? Absolutely. Jenny, you talked about sustainable solutions and your approach, again, using those entrepreneurial skills. We want to enhance that. Richard has got a story going back a number of years of an approach that has really worked in their school with a focus on their cohort. So there's some real key ingredients of what really works. We'd be looking to maximise and share and cascade across our system. But coming back to your original question, the local authority doesn't have a jurisdiction here with regards to that level. It's local schools' determinations.
I'm concerned that we've got so many questions. So many people want to come in on this one in particular. If you can be very brief, Jackie and Richard, and then we really are going to have to canter through the others because we've got quite a few that we were hoping to ask. Jackie?
So, Chair, thank you. Just in respect of the purchase and power, and the report states on page 23 of the pack that until recently a catering framework for maintained primary schools was in place, but due to low take-up, it was handed back to schools to manage their own catering arrangements. So I think Olive Catering has recently taken over catering for 6 primary schools, previously using the framework. But we would be willing to stand up the framework again if that was something that was thought that schools thought they want to buy into. Our children's centres are currently recommissioned through a framework for that, and the contract's currently with Ashlands Organic, and we're regularly reviewing that contract. So the capabilities there. It was just previously there wasn't a great deal of interest, so we stood it down.
Thank you. Very briefly, please, Richard.
Oh, that one, you see, did it for me last time. I didn't see which button you pressed. Apologies for the delay. 2 things. It is a governing body responsibility. And of course, if you are outsourcing to a company, the governing body have to re-award the contract. And that is quite a powerful incentive for companies to deliver good quality. Equally, if you've got a company, as we have, who only specialise in school meals, they don't do any other form of catering, they also have some bulk buying power as well, because they're buying on behalf of all of the different schools that they have contract with. There is one way that the council is involved. I think it's important because parents often want to know this, is that inspection of hygiene and health and safety. That is done by the council, and that 5-star rating that you see outside restaurants and things, you also see within school kitchens. And of course, Urswick's got a 5.
Thank you very much for that. So I've got Councillor Talbot-Deloff and Councillor Binny Lubbock, and then I'll take another round of questions after.
Thank you, Chair. My question will be very brief. I'm quite curious about long-term sustainability of how things have been done at the moment in terms of free school meals, given that we don't have yet universal school meals for all in Hackney, which is the hope. What is the percentage of time your school and team spend on finding creative ways to ensure children and young people do not go hungry in the borough? And do you see this amount of time is spent, whether you see as sustainable in the long term, both for your pupils and your team? Thank you.
Just wondering who is that director? Is that the schools? Don't know if any of our schools wanted to come in on that.
I mean, I regard our model as sustainable, but it is dependent on things like lettings income in our case, and in other schools' cases, it is about sometimes charitable donations and support of partners and all of that sort of thing. I would wonder if there is, at any point in the future, the opportunity of some sort of fund that the council could create to develop school kitchens, for example, because the other thing we did last summer is that we had a major refurb of our kitchen, which is now 12 years old and the equipment was beginning to fail. And that came in at 120,000, which is a significant amount of money to spend on a kitchen. But I hope we don't have to do it again for at least another 10 years.
Thank you, Richard. If no other schools want to come in on that point around sustainability, I'll move on to Councillor Binny Lubbock, please.
I'm afraid my question isn't quite as short, I'm afraid. So yeah, on page 18 and 19, we're looking at the secondary school eligibility for free school meals. Nationally, there's a bit of a drop-off, and I'm wondering why Hackney Hackney's trend seems to be different in chart 3, and it seems to be we have an increase in secondary school free school meals eligibility. And I'm wondering if that could also help, you know, when we're looking at, are we able to look, you know, do like Islington and Tower Hamlets, provide free school meals universally? Would that make it easier to roll out to the secondary schools as well, because there is a larger cohort there? I wanted to follow up with what Deputy Mayor Bramble was saying about the task force and the summit, and what the head teachers have been saying around the urgency of this with a cost of living crisis. What's the timeline for that task force and summit, and what can be kind of rolled out before that? And just to touch again on Islington and Tower Hamlets model that we've seen in the report, are they totally footing the bill on that? And you know, how can we look at that as a model, you know, that would immediately make it more sustainable for schools, and it also means that all of the money that they're, you know, getting from lettings or other, you know, charitable donations, whatever, could then actually go into other educational programs. But also, if that was fully subsidized, would that disincentivize schools from encouraging more take up? You know, is having to pay for some of that encourage them to really engage with the parents to make sure they're getting maximum take up from the scheme?
Can I, because that was a few questions in one, so I'll hand over to you on that one, Paul, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you. We welcome the challenge, and I think through the challenge we get better outcomes, right? And when we look at the Islington model, there are 151 local authorities nationally. There are a number of other models ongoing. We will be looking at the Islington model to see how they funded the Islington model, but we always have to risk assess and impact assess all models as well, because sometimes there can be unintended consequences, such as the impact on pupil premium, the impact that may well have for our schools as well. So we have to evaluate that rather than rush to a solution, rush to that. So we will be having conversations with Islington and neighbouring authorities, and we'll be looking at practice other way. So we wish to find a model that's right for Hackney, in response to Hackney's needs and Hackney's challenges as well. So absolutely, that will be part of the mix. You asked about the timescales. The work of the focus group, invitations will be going out this week for the focus group. So we've identified, if you like, the right roles and functions and responsibilities, education system leaders, technical folks such as chefs as well, and the partners in other parts of the system, as I mentioned earlier, will be part of that. So, and the intention is the focus group will be meeting in a couple of weeks, and we'll be looking at the intention is to have a summit over the coming weeks, ideally end of November / early December, subject to availability and all of the above. And it's important that the committee, if you like, the focus group can work up, learning from elsewhere, put together a series of recommendations, but also look at the financial implications around this as well as coming up with models and recommendations, because there are a number of activities and processes that we can look at that potentially we could be looking at putting in place here. So the simple answer to your simple question is, over the coming weeks, the task group will be convening a summit. The intention is to have it over the coming weeks before we break for Christmas, to be able to report back to the Deputy Mayor and the Mayor with regards to a series of recommendations to be able to hopefully share something tangible with relevant forums in the new year.
You had a question also about secondary schools.
Yeah, the secondary school eligibility, nationally it seems to drop off, but in Hackney it seems to increase. So I'm just wondering what the reasoning is behind that, both nationally and in Hackney, or if there is any indication as what the reasoning behind those trends are.
And that could be a number of reasons, and that's another challenge, if you like, exam question for the task group to be looking at what's the narrative behind that, because data only gives half the story. So it's important that we look at that and having as much data as possible to ask those challenging questions, what's going on in Hackney, and how does that compare with our statistical neighbours, not just other neighbours as well. So it is an important question that will be answered by the task group.
Do we have any other questions from members in the room? No, I've got a question from Councillor Sizer, then Councillor Selman, please. Councillor Sizer.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just wondering if there's been any work done around the move to a plant-based diet and any cost savings and the benefits around that. I know other councils have moved towards a towards a plant-based diet across schools, and just tying it in obviously with the council's commitment to net zero. Just wondering if any work's been done around this at all.
Thank you for that. And then Councillor Selman.
Yeah, no, so the first one was just a follow up on the bit about kind of more urgent actions or things in the near term. I'm aware that the council is doing a lot of work around about income maximisation at the moment and proactively contacting people. I'm just wondering if there was any link across with that in terms of where we're contacting people about things like benefit eligibility, also having the conversation and using that as a prompt to talk about preschool meal eligibility. And the second thing was just coming back to the bit that you were highlighting, which was about the contract that there was in place for a number of primary schools which had fallen away. And I was just wondering if there was any details or background or information as to why there was low take up and why schools weren't sort of keen to sign up to that. Thanks.
So I'll hand over to officers first, and then I think Louise wanted to come in, I think, on one of those, but I'll hand over to Paul first, please.
Thank you. In terms of the first question about the move towards plant-based diet across our schools, I'm not in a position to answer that question. I'm not sure if our school colleagues would be better positioned, if they've got any views on that, what's happening in their schools with regards to, if you like, at the coalface on that.
The Chefs in Schools organisation that I think Louise and I both use definitely have meat-free days. So I think it's a ratio of 2 days without to 3 days with. So there definitely is a move from organisations like that to look at different options and a plant-based option. The Circular Food Economy project that we're about to embark on will definitely promote that as well, but that's an independent project with a huge amount of funding behind it for the growing and the production of the food through a charitable bid. So I think there's two moves there independently moving towards that, and I think the successes of that are yet to be seen, so we can report back on how that works.
Louise, did you want to come in on that?
I was going to say what Jenna said about the fact that Chefs in Schools menus do 2 days vegetarian or plant-based, 2 days meat, and the meat has to be very good quality, and then 1 day fish. And that is the basis of their menus, and that complies with the national food standards as well, which is something we're required to do. But the vegetarian days, when we first started them in 2014, there was some kickback on that from some parents and some groups, but actually now they're very well integrated, and the children don't talk about the vegetarian days anymore. It's just the meals are just they're just meals. They're not. There's no difference noticeable. In terms of why schools are not taking into catering contracts, there's an obvious thing which I believe in, which is the fact that if you're buying into an outside catering contract, they're not doing it for no profit. They are making profit from schools. And if schools are able to manage their own service in-house, upskill their kitchen teams, provide meals for cheaper than catering companies, then you'd have to question why any school would want to go to a catering company, because they are actually doing it to make profit. And there is ways that they can use that to move food that may not be used, might not be the best quality food, can be shifted through the school meal system by some less scrupulous catering companies. I'm sure none of those are working in Hackney, but that is a known failing of catering companies working in schools. So that's my particular view, and that may be something that other head teachers in Hackney believe.
Yeah, Donna.
Hi, good evening. I just wanted to say that I think last year when we were contacted by a provider looking at meat-free meals in schools, we actually did a survey. It wasn't very well returned, but the survey that we got gave a bit of a flavour. So just looking at the numbers now, I think 64% of schools said that they actually had in-house catering, and 77% of them, or 36% of them, provided meat-free days once a week, and 23% twice a week. So I think we did do some work to look at what was available, to try and map what was happening, and then to think about how we could support. I have to say that while some of these questions are directed at education, who are sometimes not best placed to answer, we do have a lead, Donna Doherty Kelly, in public health, who is leading on this piece of work.
Thank you, Donna. And on that point, I think that I appreciate this is Paul's first scrutiny commission, which is probably worth pointing out to people as our interim director of education. So I think that there are quite a few of these questions that we may need to figure out who might be the best people who might have the answers to hand. Appreciate that this is your baptism of fire. Although you've been here in another guise previously, but in this role, this is your first time. So yes, thanks, Donna. We'll figure out who might be best placed to sort of answer some of these questions that have been raised today. I think Councillor Selman had a follow-up question.
No, it was just picking up on what Louise was saying about in-housing. Is that okay? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so which was the sort of third question I was going to squeeze in, but was worried about asking too many questions, but I'll squeeze it in anyway, which was just, so on the in-house point, so do we have an idea of what the numbers are in terms of schools that have in-house catering? And then to link to that, for schools that haven't, so why they haven't, so either in terms of insight we have as a council about kind of barriers or reasons why that isn't something that schools have been able to do, or I don't know if that might be something that Andy also had insight or in terms of ours, because I think you're both schools that haven't in-house, so just getting a sense as to, because Louise has talked quite powerfully about why they found in-housing really useful, but why other schools might not have been able to or considered doing that.
Yes, Andy.
We do have in-house catering at this point in time. We've certainly been speaking to chefs in school. We've also approached an external provider, and again, it's about profits. And I think the initial conversations that we're having is that it's not profitable for them to actually come and take our catering because of the numbers. So yeah, so we've been exploring that to see if we can, obviously get best value for young people, and of course to improve the services and the range of offering there. But yeah, we have explored that, but it's just not viable at this time.
Councillor, sorry, Paul.
Thank you, Chair. And just following on from what Andy has said, it's a determination for school governing bodies. It's not something for the local authority to engage or impose in any way, shape or form. It's a school governing body decision regarding in-house or not.
Understand that that's not something we can mandate and that it's for governing bodies. I guess I was wondering if we had any data on schools that have or haven't in-house, and like I say, just insight in terms of the different barriers or reasons why that might be difficult for schools to do.
It's something that I think is a question to be had with regards to the task group. If it's felt to be a barrier, does it add significant value? If it's something that adds significant value to our work, because it is ultimately, whether it's a school in-house or not, it's about the outcome for children and young people and getting the best quality food experience for them in their setting. So if an in-house approach delivers that, then that's the approach the school governing body would have. You asked, have we got that data? I haven't got that to hand, but it's something I'm comfortable to go away and look at and see if we've got that and we can share that retrospectively. But I'm all for, and I think everybody here would be, that best possible outcome in terms of the best possible food, nutritional value experience at the school. It's about, the model is secondary. It's getting the best possible outcome.
Thank you, Paul. I think I've got a couple of follow-up questions in relation to this from Richard and Councillor Gordon.
I just wanted to answer that point in that the way we do this, the way we structure it, they have an agreed management fee. So in effect, the worst examples of external caterers is vending machines and all sorts of high profit type things to get the kids to basically part with their money. Now, obviously, that's irrelevant to the Urswick model. So we have negotiated a management fee. So in effect, the school pays the cost of the food, the school pays the real cost of the staff, and then this is a management fee, which in effect is for training, it's for menu development. It's also so that if, as happened today, one of the kitchen staff is off sick, they are able to bring in a replacement who's trained and has got a DBS and all of those sorts of things. So we regard it as good value for money, But there are undoubtedly some operators out there that are not as scrupulous. We took away the contract from another provider several years ago when we went down this route, as I say, to a caterer whose only core business is school meals. They don't do ascot or anything like that. They just do school meals.
Richard and Councillor Gordon.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, I mean, just sort of a follow up on that. I mean, obviously, really welcome the Commission call. I mean, that's great, and it's great that you're going to be doing it at, you know, such pace as well, and that we can look forward to, you know, in sort of near future to reporting. It's obviously, I mean, it's obviously great that that everyone's coming together to do this sort of piece of work. I mean, I just wondered whether, I mean, notwithstanding the financial devolution to schools, whether we can be maybe a little bit more ambitious about the scope of our involvement as a local authority, because I think this may be something that's behind Councillor Selman's question. I mean, obviously there are different factors in terms of whether you have in-house or external providers, you know, certainly in terms of, you know, the terms and conditions of those workers, you know, who are usually members of our community, you know, and what that says about us as a society. So, and I think really, I mean, notwithstanding the delicate balance and the limited, you know, the limited statutory duty we have, I think it would be really good if we could, you know, and I do appreciate the heads here are making these choices and judgments and assessing the quality, but I mean, it is slightly disturbing really that this seems to be outsourced. I mean, obviously we've also had, you know, sorry, the quality is not something that we have a role in. I know there's nothing you can do about it, but a role that we have, direct statutory role we have locally. And I think also, obviously, we've heard a lot of really good things about the contribution of chefs in schools, but you know, so they're another stakeholder in that. I mean, they're obviously got a local connection, but to me, again, it would be good if the scope of the Commission looked really sort of over, you know, how sustainable the relationships are with these, after all, voluntary sector organisations, however, you know, however useful and sort of helpful they are. And also, I mean, looking at things like local sourcing is another aspect of sustainability, you know, local sourcing with our local businesses and locally grown food. It's really good to hear about that. So I think there's a number of different stakeholders really, and a number of different issues across here. I'm sorry, that's probably a bit of a speech, Chair, I do apologise, but
no, that's fine. But just to follow on from that, I totally agree with what Councillor Gordon has said, and just to think that we've had a couple of schools that have contributed today and said that actually it was a bit of a no-brainer, it sounds like, for you after you sort of, for Mandeville and Gainsborough, after you looked at the figures, it just made sense for you economically, especially given the climate that you're in terms of falling school rolls and other challenges. And I suppose it makes me wonder whether there is, I'd like to think that there would be a role for us as a local authority to be able to support other schools that have similar levels of children on free school meals, to be able to sort of make that persuasive case to them about what that change and that shift might look like. Because I think for us as a Commission, I don't want to speak on behalf of others, but it's really challenging when we're hearing such variation in the cost to families, and for something that parents don't really have much of a choice over in terms of what your closest school is. So I think, it would be great if we could play some role in promoting some sort of continuity among schools by sharing some of the best practice that we think we've sort of seen, certainly here today, and others that we might have a chance of sort of being able to explore. I'll let Paul come. Sorry, Councillor Suso Runga and Councillor Binny Lubbock.
Thank you, Chair. I fully echo what you've said with regards to sharing what works. We've heard today some fantastic examples of good practice in local schools. And I've said about the entrepreneurial skills, the practice of actually making a difference, to extending the reach of these programs of work. And sustainability is something we'll be evaluating naturally as part of this process. This isn't just about quick fixes. What works locally? What works in neighbouring authorities? What works nationally? Let's risk assess that as well. Let's look at all options being on the table. So absolutely, sustainability is an important measure of how successful this programme of work will be. really not looking to get into the conversation around in-house and all of that. I think the schools have autonomy to make decisions based on what's right for their schools, and that's a governing body decision. It's not a local authority decision. That's a national policy determination of which the schools, the head teachers and their governing bodies will make those decisions. There isn't a role for the local authority in that. Regarding the role of voluntary sector in this conversation, absolutely. We want to make best use of all available resources and assets if we're looking to deploy a strengths-based approach to how best we can do this locally. So if we do have some voluntary sector organisations locally who have got skin in the game, who are playing a role in this agenda, absolutely it would be important, Councillor Gordon, that they have a seat at the table as part of this conversation.
Thank you, Paul. I'm mindful of time, although I think that we have sort of moved into some of the other spaces that we did want to ask questions around. But Councillor Suso Runga and then Councillor Vinnie Lubbock, please.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to specifically ask about alternative educational provision. The entitlement to free school meals for children in alternative educational provision is quite high. And so my question is, what are the arrangements that are in place for children in alternative education provision to ensure that entitlement is met? And also, is there any additional support to those alternative providers in regard to that commitment? Thank you.
Would you mind taking another one as we're trying to get through this item? Is that okay? Another two.
Sorry, just a couple of suggestions about what the task force might want to look at when it's formed is around, we were talking about the input that the council has in terms of food quality and things like that. And I'm just wondering if in those situations where the council is Islington or other places where they're providing free school meals, whether they have an input and are able to say, okay, we want to make sure that the food's meeting a sort of standardized an amount. And one of the other things that I've been raising with Deputy Mayor Bramble is around school meal debt that is being accrued, and trying to make sure that we have the data to say, okay, are schools chasing parents who can't afford school meals for their arrears? I think that'd be really good information for the task force to also look into.
Thanks, Paul.
The entitlement to free school meals and alternative provision, that's a good challenge. I'm not going to waste your time. I'd like to bring in Richard in terms of our lead professional here. Let's use the specialist, right? Richard?
So for anyone who doesn't know, I am the executive head at New Regents College. First of all, any child that is on site at New Regents College gets a free school lunch, and so that's a universal offer to those children. And the same is true for any alternative provision that we commission. So it's part of the service level agreement that they have to provide the youngsters with a lunch, whether they are entitled to free school meals or not. Now, the APs are hugely different. So they would include a very large organisation like B6, which has a kitchen on site and has a sort of a big back office staff, if you like. And so those meals, I think, are really straightforward and meet the same standards. There are alternative providers that maybe cater for less than 20 children and are doing some quite niche work. Part of our quality assurance is to go and visit and check on all of the lunch arrangements that they have in place. It is variable. Some cook on site, some buy things in, some have a relationship with a local food provider, and that's how they get the stuff in. But I would undoubtedly say that is more variable, but nevertheless, it's an absolute entitlement of any young person in alternative provision commissioned by New Regents that they are given a lunch every day. There is some additional commissioning that takes place separate to New Regents. A school can commission AP directly for itself, and we have no role in that. It would be for the school to determine arrangements with the AP.
Thank you. Did you want to come in, Paul?
The other question with regards to when looking at other models, and I think I mentioned earlier, an important part of that conversation will be assessing risk and getting an understanding of the financial implications and the risk implications. So speaking to those local authorities about models and what works and what doesn't work and what will be the lessons learned. So that's one of the benefits of maybe going slightly later. In some other local areas, you can actually pick up the learning and maybe trying to avoid some of those pitfalls that those local areas have gone through. So I'm not going to preempt and or undermine any forthcoming due process with regards to the work of the task force. So I'm not going to say to you what the defined outcome will be. What I will say to you is there's a commitment to make sure that partners come together, learn from practice elsewhere, pull together a series of recommendations based on Hackney's needs in response to Hackney's pressure points on our residents and so forth, and coming up with a creative solution. The task force, to be able to report on time in response to local needs, will move at pace as best as possible and endeavour to meet expectations to dealing with a number of these things that have come up tonight, as well as what's been shared before.
Thank you very much, Paul. I think I'm going to bring this item to a close by I'm going to do I think what Councillor Binny Lubbock did and sort of make a suggestion as well, because I appreciate that you may not have the answer to this, Paul, but in our data it's quite clear that we've got a particularly complex situation in regards to our Orthodox Jewish schools, where they've got exceptionally low uptake and considerably lower than the other maintained schools. And in addition, many of the Orthodox Jewish children are educated in local independent schools and do not qualify for free school meals. So that's a challenge that I would like to see us sort of embarking on, sort of understanding better how we can support an increase in the uptake of free school meals in those schools, and to have to support those families as much as we possibly are able to. But just before I potentially lose some of our head teachers, who are more than welcome to stay for future items, but I'm not sure if you'd want to necessarily, but wondered if you could share with us what your experiences are, or sorry, what our uptake, the uptake of various different schools in the borough for free, for the National Breakfast Club, free breakfast foods and grants. The programme, sorry, the data from the National Breakfast Club programme suggests that whilst many Hackney schools were eligible to receive free support, only 9 local schools have actually signed up. And I just wonder whether, in your experience, especially as heads of federations, whether you have a sense of why that might be, but also a second question, if I may, about what sort of connections do you feel the schools have with local food projects and food networks, and what additional support might schools need to connect with local food projects? Louise, did you want to come in first?
I think the Breakfast Club one is quite a simple answer. Magic Breakfast were involved, first of all, with many Hackney schools, and many schools are still supported by Magic Breakfast. I can't speak for all the head teachers present or out there, but the Magic Breakfast machine, if you like, as a charity, started in a lot of Hackney schools and has been in place, certainly I've been working in Hackney since 2004 when we first got involved with Magic Breakfast. So they've been around a really long time, and they provide the free. So that when the National Breakfast Scheme came in, a lot of Hackney schools were already up and running, and you only qualified for that if you didn't already have a free breakfast service or a breakfast food service being delivered to your school by a charity. So I think that's a simple answer. But yeah, what was your second point, Sophie? Sorry.
So it's just about how well connected schools feel to our local food projects and networks.
I'd say personally the Felix project has been fantastic, and I suggest that other schools, that's something that could be coordinated centrally, possibly. The Felix project do deliver to a number of Hackney schools, and then therefore the schools are in a perfect position as hubs in their community to be able to deliver free food to the families in their community. And it doesn't have to be limited to only families or people who have children in that school. Schools are in a perfect position, as we discovered during the pandemic, to be able to be distributors of free food, and projects like the Felix project really like to work with us, so it's a no-brainer for me.
Thank you, Louise. I don't know if any of the other heads wanted to come in on either of those points. Jenna?
The Felix project currently aren't taking any more referrals, so I think that's an example of where an organisation like that is at full capacity. And as Louise said, most schools, I imagine, have the Magic Breakfast subscription, which means you can't then subscribe to other things. So their current free school meals criteria is 35%. And I imagine that's most of Hackney schools can meet 35%. So that would explain why they're not doing the other breakfast clubs.
Andy?
Thank you, Chair. Some of these projects are, the first time I'm hearing some of these. I think it would be useful if we could have some sort of database that's shared among schools. I mean, different schools are individually pursuing their own funding streams, and it would be useful if somehow there is a central database that could be accessed by all schools in the local authority.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody, in particular for our guests who have joined us this evening, Louise and Jenna. Really appreciate your contributions. It's really helpful for us as a commission to get a sense of what this challenge, this, that we're all experiencing, I think, as members. Many of us are parents, have been governors, and are councillors receiving casework that details the real extent of the challenges that many of the families in the borough are experiencing, and it's really important for us to get a sense of where our schools are centred in this conversation and how we might be able to work together. I think with the efforts of Hackney Education Service with the task force, and to sort of try and bring together the great minds and the great projects that we've heard a lot about today, and to see whether there's anything that we can do to support our other schools who may be experiencing similar challenges and might benefit from the insights that you've managed to helpfully provide us today. It's clear, I think, that there is more work for Hackney Education Service to do around this task force to understand what that landscape looks like currently, and to better understand, because I suppose it's shifting sands, isn't it? What may not have worked for people a few years ago might actually now, in this current climate, need to be revisited. So I think I really welcome the work around looking at which schools are providing universal free school meals, because I don't think we actually knew that all of the schools that have contributed today actually were providing universal free school meals. So it would be good for us to know what that looks like, and also whether we can, as mentioned, share food practice around this, and also around breakfast clubs to get a better sense. I know that today we've understood that perhaps those stats on only 9 schools working with the programme perhaps doesn't necessarily tell the accurate picture of what's going on in the borough, but it would be good if we had a better sense of what that looks like. So the Commission will draw up a number of recommendations which it hopes will advance the work to support efforts to address food insecurity in schools. We understand that the Cabinet Member has, as we mentioned, commissioned this task group to look at school meals, and the Commission hopes that its work will continue to contribute positively towards this. So thank you very much for everybody joining us today. You are welcome to, you're more than welcome to leave if you want to, Louise and Jenna, but thank you very much for joining us. Right, okay, so moving on to the next item, which is the urgent item, the Ofsted visit. So in September 2022, the Ofsted visited Children and Family Service to assess front of house services, access points to children's social care, care thresholds, etc. Can I ask the Group Director just to quickly summarise any immediate issues from the Ofsted assessment to the Commission and outline any key actions the service is planning to take in response? It's worth noting that if there are any substantive issues that warrant questioning, can I suggest that we pick these up as a Commission at the next meeting, where the focus on children, where we've got focus on children's social care, and be able to look at this in a bit more depth. So over to you, Jackie.
Thank you, Chair. So Ofsted carried out a 2-day focus visit on the 21st and 22nd of September, and the inspectors were looking at local authority arrangements. They call it front door services. So that was around decision-making and thresholds for referrals about children in need, child protection inquiries. They're also looking at our decision-making about stepping up and stepping down from early help, any emergency action out of hours, our assessment service in response to referrals that we accepted, and also our early help work. So the headline findings were that they found that children in need of help and protection in Hackney benefit from a strong front door services that help to ensure they receive the right support at the right time. They found that some of the improvements we'd made in terms of the integration of early help workers into our multi-agency safeguarding hub had improved the screening of contacts and referrals, and this helped ensure that children and families were directed promptly to appropriate services at the right time. They found that most children receive proportionate responses that meet their needs, and that action for children at immediate risk of harm was timely and effective. They thought that senior leaders are driving necessary changes to improve practice at pace that suits the workforce and allows for the ongoing delivery of safe services. They found we had committed and skilled staff who felt supported through the implementation of a new practice framework with a focus on anti-racist, trauma-informed and systemic approach to practice. They said that staff felt listened to, valued and supported. They commented on the strong political leadership of the services, and that they said the senior leadership team know their services well and were making improvements in what they recognised as very challenging context. So in terms of, they commended our response to the cyber attack and the quick turnaround to get us back onto we took 5 months from, I think it was November last year, to get us back onto our main recording system, which we got onto in April this year, so they commended us for that. They were very aware of the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on our workforce in terms of the different impact on global majority communities and global majority people. And also in terms of child queue and the response and the impact that had on our staff, and but also on a wider community. They also commended us for our work around, they commended the significant political support for youth services, and particularly the universal and targeted youth offer, and they recognised that as having an impact on our response to serious youth violence. So in terms of what they felt needed to improve, well, firstly, I'm happy to say that they didn't find anything that I hadn't told them about. So that was part of what they said, we knew our services well. So alongside, there's a national crisis in terms of the recruitment of qualified and experienced social workers. And in the assessment part of the service, we had a particularly challenging period that proved to be quite difficult to recover from. So that meant that some of our timeliness for some of our assessments slipped, and also that meant that we had a bulge in caseloads in the assessment service. But we've had quite a strong programme of having daily reports on how that's going, and also in terms of stabilising some of the workforce there. So and the other issue was staff reported and they could see evidence of really strong management oversight of decision making. They could see really strong rationales for decisions. But what was lacking in that part of the service was reflective supervision on the record, although social workers were able to talk to the inspectors about this. So we were already working on quite a comprehensive workforce strategy, and I'm happy to bring that along to the next Scrutiny Commission, because we've been working with our finance colleagues about looking at what we can put in place that makes us an attractive place where people want to come and work, but also want to stay and work. In terms of the timeliness of practice regarding assessments, we've been onto that, and we had a programme where we've been really making improvements anyway. And I think what's be helpful for Scrutiny to hear is that despite in a very small minority of cases there was some drifting delay, that all of the assessments that inspectors saw were of a good quality, that took family history into account, that really looked at risk, and that they could see the strength of management oversight on all of the work that they saw. I can pause there.
Thank you very much, Jackie. And just to commend you and all of the other officers in children and family services for your efforts. But following the Ofsted inspection, I know that it will have taken a lot of work to get us to a point where we're receiving outcome of a focus visit that is speaking so highly of us, and recognising those efforts and the impact that that's having on the lives of children and young people that our services are working with. So just to commend you all on that, and I think we'll pick this up in further detail at the next scrutiny meeting, if that's okay.
That's fine. And thank you for your comments, because I will pass that on to our staff, because it's our frontline workers that Ofsted spend all of the time with. So this is based on their reports and what they saw. So we'll pass on your comments to them, and they'll be very grateful.
Please do, please do. Thank you. Thanks very much. Now, sorry, we'll move on to item 5, which is exclusions and school moves. So exclusions and all school moves is a standing item on the work programme of the Commission to review the range and number of pupil moves across schools in Hackney. This is to ensure that the Commission has oversight of school exclusions in the wider context of all school moves. Therefore, the Commission has annual updates on permanent exclusions, managed moves, children in elective home education, children in alternative provision. There are 2 slight amendments to this data for this year. The Commission also requested additional demographic information in relation to SEND status for all school moves data. And in light of the rising rates of pupil absence and persistent absence, the Commission also requested a brief update on local data, given their clear connection to exclusions and other school moves. For this item, we have Paul Senior, the Director of Education, Chris Roberts, the Head of Wellbeing and Education Safeguarding, Donna Thomas, the Head of Early Years, Early Help and Wellbeing. We've probably got slightly less time now, so we have to be tighter, I think, with our questions. But yes, I think probably handing over to you initially, Paul or Chris, not sure who.
Thank you, Chair. This is naturally a very serious conversation. It's a very serious issue that the local authority, with the support of our partners in schools and partners across crime reduction, education, social care and health, are looking very closely at. We recognise the impact on all forms of social exclusion, not just educational exclusion, as on local children and young people. And as a system, we seek to work together to make sure that the needs of our children and young people can be met as best as possible in local schools and settings, but at the same time making sure we're working together to remove the barriers to learning and well-being and so forth. So there are a range of measures that the local area are putting in place with the support of our partners, but ultimately it's how well can we work together as a system to prevent the need for schools to exclude and for children and young people to suffer disadvantage and all forms of social exclusion. So the officers have put together a very helpful paper which provides some data, some graphs and some commentary with regards to what's happening locally. Chris, would you be able to provide some supporting information behind that, please, just to give some high-level feedback?
Yeah, sure, can do that. I mean, as you see within the report there, the vast majority of pupil movement within the borough relates to pupils moving into Hackney in need of a school place, moving out of Hackney and no longer needing a local school place, or parents choosing to move between one local school and another. And the systems that we have in place to try and monitor these and have oversight of those, have those reporting arrangements in place. And as you'll note from the report, there was over 1,800 removals from schools roles that were reported to us within the borough. And as you'll see, there was over 1,400 applications for new school places received in the application. But within that, then there is that sort of small group of children who are the children who are probably potentially more vulnerable within our education system, the children who are become permanently excluded or moving into elective home education, or have subject to managed moves, or moving into alternative provision. So what you've got in this report here is a cohort report that captures the data, particularly around those smaller cohorts of children, looking at those numbers. And as you'll see, particularly if you look at the school admissions data as well, some of the flows that come out there around children, how they flow back into the system. So some of the children that are around elective home education, you'll see a proportion of those children returning from elective home education back into the school system. So that's part of the processes we work with around families in terms of where they are and where they're not providing a suitable education, how we get them back into the mainstream school system as well. So happy to take any questions, particularly around data that people have around particular issues or particular areas, rather than going into all those in details if people want to particularly focus. I noticed the chair noted a bit around persistent absence this year, and nationally and in London, that has gone up quite significantly compared to pre-pandemic. The rates of persistent absence are around about double what they were pre-pandemic. Hackney is no different to that. We are consistent with London and England in that. On the plus side, I suppose, our rates are lower than what they are in London and England across the piece. We are on the right side of the data on that, but that is still too many children who are being persistently absent from school, and that has is an impact on their longer term outcomes. And our numbers have doubled compared to pre-pandemic, like they have elsewhere.
Thank you, Chris and Paul. I wondered if it would be helpful actually if members of the Commission could sort of have a bit of a theme to the questions if possible, and maybe if we can start with if anybody has any questions around children missing education. If so, please speak now. Although I did wonder whether Councillor Gordon wanted to ask an overarching question that you mentioned earlier, might be helpful at this point.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you obviously very much for the report, which was, you know, a really interesting read. My sort of more overarching question really was in terms of obviously we've got a number of activities as a local authority, was just whether you're satisfied as senior officers that we've got sufficient capacity to analyse this data sort of in-house and get the maximum amount of, you know, sort of information and benefit from the, you know, the data that's being collected from our schools in relation to these moves between them. And also I suppose really sort of second question, that's sort of about capacity in terms of data, but also in terms of sort of officer capacity working on, you know, on, I mean, we've obviously got quite a number of different priorities as an education authority, but I know that one of our priorities really is reducing exclusions, and part of this picture is sort of elective home education. So whether we've got, you know, sufficient capacity of officers really sort of working with our partners on that, it would be good really to sort of know the numbers. I mean, it's not, I mean, I do totally understand the pressures we have on the local authority, but I think we've had some challenges really in sort of trying to see the whole picture in this data, and I just wonder whether we've got enough capacity really to analyse that and make sure that it's, you know, sort of communicated and we maximise the benefit from all this information that's been brought together. So that's my overarching question. Thank you.
Can I just see if the other members of the Commission have any other questions that they want to bring in at this point? Councillor Binny Lubbock, and then Councillor Sizer, I'll bring you in for the next round of questions.
I was just going to follow up on the question around off-rolling, and if there's been any suspected cases of off-rolling pupils in Hackney in the last 12 months, considering that's you know, not legal way of doing those school moves.
Councillor Gordon, the question with regards to do we have capacity? Well, we will always want more, right? That's the nature of what we're trying to do. Our officers work as effectively and as efficiently with our schools as possible as we can to progress the attendance agenda, and in terms of looking at the data and bringing the right challenge. In some of our schools, with the freedom to innovate, will actually deploy their own attendance resource. So our role is slightly different in terms of challenge and support. Some of our schools do buy into our services as well. So have we got sufficient resources? We'll always want more naturally, but we have to be realistic of the world that we're operating in. And do we have enough resources to actually look at the data and have targeted conversations with schools where there may be concerns in the space? Then that's what we're in a position of doing so. So there are some conversations ongoing with schools where there is a need for a little bit more challenge and support in the attendance space. And that allows us to actually follow up in a targeted way as well. So Chris, I don't know if you want to add anything further to that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo there in terms of yeah, we could always do with more, and there's, yeah, you got more you can do there. I mean, one of the challenges with the data is there's not always necessarily one consistent data set that has all these people, so different teams. So this report here is compiled with data sets reported from different teams, or each maintaining and recording their own data. So that brings its own inherent challenges in that, because there's not necessarily one team that has overall pictures. Like, you know, there's data around pupils with education, health and care plans and doing their moves is held by one set of team. Data around removal from roll data is held by, comes into school admissions. There's other data around elective home education, and children missing education comes into my team. So there's not always necessarily always data sitting in kind of one place that's with one data set, with one data owner, which does make analysis sometimes harder. You asked about the resource that we have around some of these areas. It is quite limited. So on elective home education, we have like one officer who works on elective home education. On children missing education, we have 2 officers. You know, one is focused on the more sort of regular bread and butter kind of elective home education, one who works around the Orthodox Jewish community. So we sometimes talk about teams. These are often teams of one focused on some of these areas, which does leave you quite limited capacity in terms of how you react and reflect. I mean, Paul talks about the new return to attendance. I think it's one of those areas where, you know, we have a traded service in terms of so those schools that buy into our service get that additional support. Some schools commission that themselves or do that work in-house. Our focus is around the statutory stuff, around prosecutions and penalty notices, again with one officer, focused on that kind of statutory element. There is new guidance from the Department of Education, which is putting new expectations on local authorities, but the department has not placed any kind of additional funding resources on that, which is something we're looking at internally about how we can meet that resourcing challenge, which would give us greater focus on attendance. And having eyes and ears and greater levels of support in schools. The other challenge at the moment, there's not necessarily a legal requirement for schools to share data with us necessarily around attendance. Again, the Department for Education has been consulting on changing that, and making it a legal requirement for schools, but up until now, historically, it's not been a requirement. So schools do voluntarily share their data, but it's not necessarily a universal picture. And that picture is better at primary, and it's thinner at secondary in terms of that information sharing. So we are not necessarily having a big consistent picture around that. I think officers make a good job around what they have with the resources they have to have that oversight and understanding each of their own individual pieces of work and their own areas of data and have that recording. But if I had more resource and more cohesion around that, we could always do more and have a better sense of it. And on the question on off-rolling, I've not been made aware of any explicit examples of off-rolling. What you sometimes often find then is relationships breaking down between parents and schools. And then when you look at those and have those conversations, you try and resolve those issues. Whether they technically come into the definition of off-rolling as is legally defined, that's often, I think, a bit more moot. It's often sometimes it's about relationship breakdowns between parents and schools. They are looking for new schools, new challenges, and often they don't necessarily always want to go back to the previous school as well. So it's how you necessarily, whether I can explicitly say there are cases of off-rolling, I'm not sure I've seen any of those explicit cases, but what you do see sometimes is those where parents don't necessarily want their children to go back to school and have withdrawn them from that school, and the relationships between that sometimes become trickier as how you unpick that.
Did you want to come in again, Councillor Gordon, then I'll...
I mean, just to say, I thank you very much, both of you, for what have been, so comprehensive and helpful answers. And I think it is, really good in this commission and other places, really to sort of interrogate the background to the data. And I feel that we do understand it and some of its limitations as well. I think this is going to be something that we are going to come back to. We do understand that you're working in a challenging environment, but it is. I mean, again, I think it won't be a surprise to you that it's really important aspiration of this commission that officers across these areas work together as much as possible with, as good data as possible, so that we have meaningful oversight really on, as a local authority, on what's happening with our children. But thank you very much for your answers, which I found very helpful.
Because I suppose many of our responses, especially some of the things that we've done in our reviews, they sit across various different areas, and I suppose it's, I suppose from the report and what you explained, Chris, it feels as though it maybe can be, maybe it's just very difficult to collect the information for the purposes that we want it for, which sort of leads me to think maybe we should collect the data that you hold for your purposes, and you can show us how that helps you to build a picture. Maybe we're getting you to force a square peg into a round hole, but the impression that it does give, sadly, is that the system is still a bit clunky and disjointed, and that it's a bit too much of a struggle to get the various different silos to communicate, because I suppose what underpins quite a lot of what's going through here is send. So that would reach across the different areas that we're collecting data for, or you know, any systemic inequalities or any disproportionalities. And you'd sort of like to think that they might sit under a piece of work that's being done there, which has been alluded to in that. And but yeah, sorry, Paul, I think you wanted to come in, and Jackie. I'm noting everybody whose hands are going up.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose it's just a general reminder to colleagues that we are no longer a local education authority. We're operating in this space as a local authority now, not a local education authority. The landscape of education has changed significantly in recent years, where many of our schools now have freedom to innovate and actually deploy their own processes. The legislative framework that local authorities now have to operate in with regards to the education landscape has changed as well, and the statutory duties that local authorities are aligned with that. So schools do have a degree of more autonomy and accountability that goes with that, but the local authority role in the education space has changed significantly. So in terms of the reach of the local authority, and again, there is something here about managing expectations with regards to the reach of the local authority and the jurisdiction of the local authority on a number of matters. Our colleagues from schools will be able to share their own personal insights as well, but we need to manage expectations here very, very carefully. And in terms of the resources available and how we can go about deploying that effectively, those will always be ongoing questions. Does the local authority discharge its statutory duties effectively? We're held up to scrutiny by Ofsted and the Department for Education. And rest assured, if we're not discharging our statutory duties effectively, we are challenged robustly. So with regards to a challenge here today, is the local authority discharging its statutory duties for education effectively? Well, I suppose if we were to look at complaints that are coming from the ICO or Ofsted or the DfE, which are quite low, that potentially tells us that we're not doing too bad in that space. With regards to attendance matters, as Chris has set out, there are new duties coming our way, and that's something as a local authority we'll be looking at over the coming months, how we work with schools and partners to implement that as best effectively as possible. With regards to SEND, and you said about siloed working, I would challenge that robustly, because again, I would say that our systems and processes, whilst we know we have scope for improvement, we're always looking at that, but comparing and contrasting our processes, we do so on a regular basis. So if colleagues do have suggestions how we can improve our processes, absolutely let us know. Rome's suggestion, I know that SEND is a big challenge. It's a big challenge, and head teachers are telling me this, and I'm looking at the data and I know there's scope for improvement. So we're not burying our head in the sand on that. But just to come back to, in terms of discharging our statutory duties, as a local authority, we did as effectively. We know we've got room for improvement. With regards to discretionary duties that used to come our way when we were a local education authority, those days are long gone. So we just need to be clear on what we can do, what's in scope and what's not.
Fully appreciate that, Paul. As many of us as, you know, politicians recognise this landscape that we're in, but I suppose this space of scrutiny is we're accountable to the public who have shared with us their deep concerns about whether we actually are discharging our duty around school exclusions, for example. And families speak quite strongly about feeling failed by our education system. So I think it's incumbent upon us to share with you not just the concerns that have been shared by families in the borough, but also our ambitions to make that right. Because if us just adhering to our statutory duties means that black boys continue to be disproportionately excluded from school, then, you know, we maybe need to ask why other local authorities aren't doing quite so bad as we are in that regard. I think, you know, we've been doing work with you around this, and I hope that we'll continue to be able to add value to the work that's already underway and that we can continue to have ambitions around the outcomes of students in this, or young people in this borough who them and their families sadly maybe wouldn't share your view of how we've been faring. But moving on to, we've got Councillor Sizer and then we've got Councillor Suso Runga, please.
So it was just a question about ongoing training and resourcing for teachers, so that there is a match between the aspirations of the council in terms of exclusions really being reduced and yet the lived reality. I guess I'm speaking as a parent of a child with SEN who's had a really difficult experience in this field. So I am quite passionate about this topic, and I think it's really important that we match the language and the aspiration with the lived reality of SEN parents. And I just wanted to bring out as well a really good example of best practice that I think you're aware of, in terms of the CEO's involvement. I met with Kieran Gill from The Difference, who I think has been part of this whole discussion previously. But The Difference is an amazing charity working around schools exclusions. And one of the things that I think they do really well, and either we could emulate or be involved with somehow, would be that training of teachers and then them coming back into mainstream education. So I'm just wondering how we really can upskill and support our teachers already doing fantastic work, but to really embed them in the aspiration of the council to really reduce exclusions.
Paul, I'll bring you in, as I appreciate it was a long question.
Before I respond, I'm mindful that Jackie had her hand up on a previous moment, and I'd rather, if she can respond, then I'll come on the other matter, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chair. Mine was in respect of your question about data and about shared data. And one of the challenges of the cyber attack has meant that a lot of our energy has been focused on restoring some of our data and getting systems up to speed. It's a particular ambition of mine that we have a single lens through which to be able to see, any child, and that will take some more significant investment in terms of time and resource to harmonise the different systems across education, social care, and we've got the youth offending service as well. So those contracts are going to be up for retendering in the near future. So we are very much thinking of having a single viewpoint, but also in terms of what Chris mentioned was fragmented teams, and I think you made allusion to that as well, is we have now got an interim director of business intelligence and strategy, whose entire aim is to bring across functions from across the children and education directorates, so we're able to have a more streamlined approach to data and understanding data.
Thank you very much. Jackie, did you want to come in, Paul?
Training. It's important that colleagues recognise that our head teachers with their teams will use their 5 continued professional development days that are allocated each year as best as necessary in response to the needs of their school. As a local authority, we offer a range of services, including access to targeted CPD as well, in response to what our schools, our SENCOs, our professionals and schools are telling us is the most, if you like, desired courses to put on as well. So that complements what schools are running. So there is a reasonable CPD offer that schools are delivering directly in response to the needs of their staff, as well as what the local authority are providing as well. So more than happy if a request is made to share information of what our CPD offer is, because I'm sure colleagues would appreciate it does compare quite favourably with other local areas nationally. With regards to reducing exclusions, absolutely, this is something we're looking very closely at. We've mentioned that a few times in this meeting. We recognise that the demographics of Hackney's school-aged population present significant challenges for the education system, and their starting points and all bringing something different. What I do know is in Hackney, we're blessed to have some outstanding school leaders, some of which are here this evening, and I'm not going to embarrass them by naming and shaming them, but they know who they are. We've got some very, very experienced, best in class, and I mean best in class nationally, school leaders here, who really do know about inclusion and gender and go the extra miles in terms of making sure the needs of children and young people who face disadvantage and at risk can have their needs met. And then it's incumbent on us as a system, and as I say, as a system across crime reduction, education, social care and health, to come together, to work collectively when our schools are saying that children and young people may not be able to have their needs met. So how well does the system work? And where there is a need for targeted conversations about lessons to be learned for the school, for partners, about how we can all do something different, those conversations take place. Any exclusion of a child or a child at risk of falling out of the system is a failure of the system. So how can we work collectively? It's not just about the school, it's the entire part of the system working together. So, Chris, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, the bit I was going to add really was about the work of the re-engagement unit, which was an expansion of that from this September, which was a recommendation that came out of the Commission report here. That's been expanded, moving from a relatively small primary trading offer, which has done some fantastic work in primary schools for those that were willing to pay for it. By really investing in that team, we've expanded it across primary and secondary from this September. So provide a universal offer. So it's providing that support around some of our, most vulnerable children within our schools in terms of around who are vulnerable to exclusion. It's helping then teachers develop their practice, helping school leaders develop their practice, and working with them in terms of how their thinking is, in terms of deliberately recruit quite a multidisciplinary team for that purpose, that draws upon people who've got practical experience in schools, got practical experience in sort of youth work backgrounds, people who've got experience in CAMS. So we draw upon a wide range of expertise in that team. And then whilst the job description for each officer is the same, we try to make sure we have a broad range of skills with that team that can really, really complement and support schools and young people in their schools and settings. So that, I think, is significant progress. We haven't necessarily seen the outturn of that. We're only a half term into that being operating. So I suppose proof will be in the eating. But I think that shows the kind of commitment that we've got and the investment that we're putting in into trying to do those preventative services and building that early help support around behaviour, rather than trying to respond to exclusions and permanent exclusion at the point of permanent exclusion. Because often when you're trying to respond to it at the point of permanent exclusion, actually you're managing at the margins. The point is to actually try and, if you can support children to sustain their school places at an earlier point in their career, to the point where they never actually become onto the radar of people like myself and other officers are being excluded because the systems are working around them at a much earlier point, and that's the holy grail we're trying to work towards.
Thank you, Chris. I had a question on that, so really welcome your answers to that, and really encouraging to hear how that's going, the expansion of the re-engagement unit. I've got quite a few questions from the Commission, so Councillor Suso Runga and followed by Councillor Selman, if I can please take two at a time.
Thank you, Chair. My question has just been answered because it was all about the re-engagement unit, so thank you very much for that. But I have a quick supplementary. Are all schools signed up to this service?
Yeah, it's a universal offer available to all schools. I think one or two are living a little bit slower, but I think on the whole now we're in every school having conversations with school leaders and supporting children in every school.
Councillor Song. It was just coming back to the point about off-rolling, and I guess it's just I guess it's something that happens by its definition quite informal and a bit of a grey area, and you've not necessarily going to have the concrete data on it. So I guess my sort of specific question was about how do we have a sense of what's going on with off-rolling, like how do we know whether it's happening or not? And I guess it's a broader question within that, which we've talked lots about data and the importance of looking at data, but the data is sort of dependent on the quality of the information that comes in to shape that data. So do we also have routes in for kind of insight, and what are the channels for us getting a sense of what is it really going on, if that makes sense, and sort of insight from either the community or families, etc., about what people are seeing happening in schools that we might need to interrogate further?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, in terms of off-rolling, I think it was the Commission's report from a few years ago, we looked at that, and since then we've been looking at, particularly around year 10, year 11 role movement. So we've been looking at children who are on the roll in sort of school roles in the autumn of year 10, who didn't make it through to their end exam. So we've had a particular focus on that cohort, and where those numbers are above 5% of their role is an arbitrary kind of check. What we do is have those conversations as part of the school improvement team, to have those conversations, like going through, right, so these children, you know, where have they gone? Have you got a clear sense of their destination? And that provides us that kind of, I suppose, dip sample, I suppose, around those role movements. All the work that we've seen on that regard is school leaders can very clearly account for where those children have gone, whether they've gone abroad, whether they've gone elsewhere in the country. So that's been quite clear in terms of the work that we've done in terms of that sort of sampling, and that work kind of carries on. We also look in terms of the sort of kind of informal, when we've got a parent who comes into home education, when we engage with them, we look about the reasons as to why. You do sometimes find that they actually don't really want to do home education, and we'll work with them to get them back into the school system and to give an outcome that they want. And what you sometimes find, they don't actually want to go back to the previous school, they want to go to a different school, and it's about getting them back into the system if that's not what they want, and it's about how you overcome that. But the challenge of something like off-rolling, it's something that sort of seems quite simple definition, but actually nailing it down is quite hard. And you know, it's just because it's often a bit more complex and a bit more nuanced about how those relationships between schools and parents and the decisions that go on with that within that.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Turbot Deloff and Joe, please, and then I'll have another round.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. This is related to my question is related to permanent exclusions and the impact it has on children and young people's mental health, their families and the communities. I'm speaking particularly with the Hackney Mental Health Champion for Hackney. Is there any data that shows perhaps whether there is a pattern with number of permanent detentions that leads to permanent exclusions? I'm asking this because often we hear that detentions, consistent, regular, ongoing detentions on young people are felt to be unfair on many occasions, a source of punishment for young people that clearly we hear and we see that cause, embarrassment and potentially a breakdown relationship with young person and the school. So I'm just quite curious of whether there is a pattern of young people having many detentions and then turning into permanent exclusion, and if we can have, that data. Thank you.
Could I just get Joe to come in, please, and then I'll hand over to Paul and Chris, both got their hands up.
Thank you. I wondered if we could have an update on what progress has been made on the inclusion charter that was being talked about being rolled out to schools, and any other strands of that inclusion work, and in particular how that will include children with SEND. I know there's been a lot of anti-racist work done and really wonderful conference and follow-up work, sort of praxis conference. But we also know that the almost 2/3 of the permanent exclusions were children with identified SEND, possibly unidentified SEND there in addition to that. And I also wanted to ask about what programme of support or interventions is being offered for those children who are persistently absent or severely absent. And again, in particular, those children with SEND amongst that cohort who will be particularly vulnerable and also vulnerable to sort of increased mental health difficulties, which become more and more entrenched. And how does Hackney compare to other local authorities with our offer and how we're dealing with that issue? Thank you.
Paul, and then I think I'll go to Chris also, he had his hand up.
The first question with regards to the impact of mental health with regards to children excluded from school, I think it'd be helpful we've got two school colleagues out who are very much working with these children, young people, seeing them on a daily basis, young people in their system, those who may be at risk of poor outcomes in form of exclusion and so forth, to maybe gain their views, because they see it from that side, and then we can maybe round it off by having a view from Chris with regards to local authority sites. I don't know, Andy, and maybe Richard, your thoughts, how you see it with your young people on a daily basis, the impact. Obviously, since the pandemic, we've seen mental health demand go up and up and up. Our colleagues in health are telling us the demand for mental health services are increasing. We know as a local area we were bringing our exclusions down. We know the data for the year to date is telling us that fixed term suspensions or exclusions are coming down, permanent exclusions are coming down. So measures are working. So there's some good stuff in place. We know we've still got to go further. But when you ask the question of the impact of in terms of on mental health of those children who are most at risk of exclusion, I suppose our colleagues in schools will be seeing those young people on a daily basis. Their views will be invaluable as part of any joined up approach. Andy?
Thank you, Paul. I'd just like to make one comment before I answer that question based on what Chris was saying there. There is another layer of accountability for off-rolling. There is a published report, the IDSR from the DFE, which provides information, and that stands for the Inspection Data Summary Report. And that gives the number of students who have not made it from year 10 to year 11 within that 2 years that you mentioned there. And it's also one of those area of, of investigation when Ofsted visits a school. So it's one of those things that is a real test. And if you're seen to be off-rolling, then you will go straight to requires improvement. So there is a robust system in place to avoid that. So schools are incentivized to ensure that that doesn't take place. So just going back to the point that you're making here, certainly since the pandemic, we've had and certainly in my school, there's a significant rise in the number of young people who have had mental health concerns. The school has certainly have had to be very creative in supporting our young people. So an example would be we have put in layers of support, whether that's counseling support within the school. We've employed a counselor, and we've had young people working with each other through anti-bullying and other areas of support. Because what we found is, reporting to CAMS, for example, the threshold is always very high, and you're told that child hasn't met the threshold. And what do? We have to provide the support. So our pastoral support system has, been used to support those young people. We've employed pastoral support managers. The heads of year have been trained, and our DSL team have been, our safeguarding team have been working with our young people. So in terms of exclusions, we always try to see if there are any underlying unmet needs. We do have different ways of supporting our young people. So in our school, for example, we have what is known as a restorative justice system. So rather than sanctioning pupils for everything, we try to have an opportunity for young people to repair and re-engage, have conversations with teachers at the end of the day, to explain their side of things and to work lessons next time. And that is, our main thrust of dealing with, behavior issues, which sometimes it's a manifestation of underlying issues, which could be whether those are SEND needs or mental health needs. Providing young people with opportunities to speak to someone in school, because we believe that every child should have someone that they feel comfortable approaching and speaking to raise any issues of concern. We try to speak to our parents, and we do take advantage of the early help schemes from the local authority, whether that's Young Hackney or any of the schemes they're in. In terms of trying to avoid exclusions, we do sometimes work with other partner schools. So I know Richard recently spoke about his AP provision, but we do broker arrangements with other schools to avoid exclusions. So I have, formed relationships with several head teachers, not only in this local authority, but in neighboring authorities, so to avoid exclusion. So sometimes a child just needs a fresh start for a week in an alternative provision, in another setting, and that's oftentimes helped to sort of recalibrate the behaviors, and they're reintegrated back into our system. So we're mindful of all the challenges. We're mindful that there's a lot of mental health issues there, and we try to use all the available resources to support those young people, to bring parents in, to have those conversations. It's not always very easy, but we've got to be creative in utilizing all resources at our disposal.
I won't repeat what Andy has said, but we've expanded all sorts of mental health provisions as well. Just to come back to a couple of points, though, and probably speaking more of my experience as being involved with new regions than Urswick. There are still some secondary schools and academies within Hackney that operate a points-based behaviour system. And so your comment about detentions and whether that has a cumulative impact and all of those sort of things, there are some schools that still use those systems. And that is where persistent disruptive behaviour is then a reason given for a permanent exclusion. There is also, though, a significant number of permanent exclusions at secondary level, which are about incidents that take place outside of school, particularly after school, and that are weapons related. And it's interesting, isn't it? Schools are expected to deal with things, and all our behaviour policies say that we will react to anything where a child is in school uniform or they're in close proximity to the school, and the exclusions guidance produced by the DfE says that schools should react to those things. The most likely reason to be permanently excluded as a secondary school child in Hackney is either weapons or is a physical assault on another young person. And those assaults rarely take place in the classroom or in the school. They usually take place in the locality, away from adult boundaries, if you like. And then the consequences are, as a head, you feel the need to permanently exclude because you've got one or more victims of a physical assault who really do have an entitlement to come back to your school the next day and feel they're in a safe space. And to be honest, I think all the training in the world doesn't necessarily solve that issue, though early intervention and more education around social media, which seems to be a trigger for a lot of these incidents, undoubtedly would make a positive impact on them.
Thank you for that both. Although I just wanted to point out that in the work that we did around the review, it was my understanding, Richard, that the majority of the exclusions in the borough were for persistent rule breaking, and that serious one-off offences there were fewer exclusions for serious one-off offences. So that may have changed, and you're reporting on something.
It's a significant proportion. Biggest amount is still persistent.
Yeah. And I think this is the bit that in the work that we've done around exclusions, we've been quite focused on, because as you've mentioned about, points-based behaviour policies or zero tolerance behaviour policies, I think we've heard parents say if you've got a child that's persistently breaking rules, that's got special educational needs, then you need to be looking at what the rules are that are being put in place, why that keeps on happening, especially for children who have additional needs that might not be being adequately met by the school. It feels as though that's the bit where we, I think, can reasonably expect to have some movement on, because especially it's worth noting that Southwark obviously have said that they're going to have no more exclusions in the borough, but the fine print there is that it's for, I don't think it includes the serious one-off offences. It's unless it's something to do with harm, and I think that does recognise that there is a space where there can be movement, and it is the persistent rule breaking, because it's such a slow burner. It's not something that's happening overnight. It feels like there must be something that can interrupt that. I'm conscious of time, and there are quite a few hands. I will let officers come in, and then I think we're going to have to submit the rest of our questions to officers for them to respond to later, if that's okay, although I personally have a burning desire to ask quite a few of them myself. But handing over to officers, I don't know who wanted to come in. Caroline, did you want to come in, and then Jackie, and then Chris?
I only wanted to pick up your last point, Councillor Conway, and just to acknowledge it really, you know, it's those repeated sort of fixed term in school exclusions that come back to back to back that kind of break down those relationships. And I don't, you know, our ambition is that through the graduate response, we put better support in place in schools to reduce that. So part of that comes out of the restructure that we've had within SEND services, so that we can reduce the kind of caseloads that our EHCP teams are dealing with. We can get back up to speed with the annual reviews and actually make sure that we're kind of more carefully monitoring how those children are being supported across schools, and in turn supporting the schools to support those children. And I think that work is has progressed and is really urgent, is really important. So I just want to acknowledge your kind of concern, and just to say that it's, you know, we are aware of it and we are working on it. And I wasn't sure if Joe, if you've got a clear response on the question around the inclusion charter, and whether you know that Deborah Robinson, who was, I think, parental engagement officer, is now diversity and inclusion systems leader. You did comment on the anti-racism work, and she just led a 2-day conference with schools as part of that kind of CPD work that Paul was talking about. And the idea is that you have to kind of almost consolidate and repeat and repeat and repeat. I always felt that with our SENCO conference work as well. We did fantastic training. Then you're expecting a cohort of staff to go back and be able to kind of train everybody else. So I think you just have to repeat it. And that is the task I think we're setting Deborah to do.
Did you want to come in, Jackie? Or unless, Joe, I think there was another question of yours actually that wasn't.
There was a question around what programme support is in place for those students with persistent and severe absence, and how does the Hackney offer compare to other local authorities? And also just a supplementary thing on the inclusion work, is that going to be including the work that Deborah Robertson is doing? That includes SEND, that's included in that, is it? And is she going to tread into this very delicate area of discipline policies, because it's so clearly linked? And I know it's difficult because schools have the right to set their own discipline policies, but as a local authority, we do have, over and above our statutory duties, we also have moral duties.
Chair, if I may. Absolutely. So Deborah's focus is on inclusion, and as board is SEND, so it's about our anti-racism, but it's also about SEND as well. Absolutely. My mind's just gone completely blank. Second part of your question again.
I was asking, is she going to tread into the area of discipline policy?
So I think it's fair to say Deborah's a very well respected teacher, having grown up, educated and taught in Hackney, and she's actually come to us from Mossbourne, so has a real understanding of how some of the discipline policies work, and also has been in her previous role as working on parental engagement, has proper insight into parents and some of our children's experiences of their schooling, and will be absolutely working on how our, so we're very proud of children's achievement in Hackney, but what we absolutely want is for children to feel very rounded at the end of their school experience, and that's absolutely her focus. Chris.
I was going to just cap off a couple of those points that haven't quite been covered off all so far. In terms of points about permanent exclusion detentions, Richard, in terms of data, two-thirds of our permanent exclusions last year were not for persistent disruptive behaviour, a third were. So the biggest single category was persistent disruptive behaviour, but the two-thirds of our permanent exclusions were for one-off kind of serious incidents, often linked to violence, weapons, sexual misconduct, and other categories against adults or against other children. So they are their biggest category, and often now some of those children will be caught up in some of those children won't necessarily have come out of the blue entirely to head teachers as for their behaviour, but they were not necessarily the contributory driving factors behind why they ended up being permanently excluded. In relation to absence and mental health, I mean, we're seeing the pressure of that on relation to our medical needs tuition service, which compared referral numbers are about twice where they were pre-pandemic. 80% of our referrals are for children with a mental health condition presented as their main presenting condition. That is putting a lot of pressure on us. terms of comparing how we are with other schools, there's not very hard and fast data, but there is kind of anecdote when you talk to colleagues in other boroughs. Most local authorities, I think, are struggling in terms of the attendance support space because of the issues. It's often increasingly become discretionary over the last decade. Days of having significant education welfare services are gone. When the funding got cut back in, ESG funding got back about 5, 6, 7 years ago. So many local authorities often operate on, a sort of very much core kind of traded enforcement area with the traded elements that goes with that. I'm talking to colleagues, and so meeting the new attendance guidance will create challenges for many, many of my colleagues, and I'm talking to those, they do find that. Where we do have some strengths, though, is we have our WAM service in schools, which does provide that access to that mental health support and advice. And talking to some colleagues, not every local authority and not every school has that kind of extensive support we have around that. So that's a plus that we do have. And I know my colleague Yvonne Wade, who's our principal educational psychologist, has been working on a guidance around emotionally based school avoidance for schools as a practice guidance to help support them around those, particularly those children that are particularly experiencing those challenges around coming to school and having that rooted very much in their sort of emotional well-being and their mental health becoming a barrier to school, which, as we all know, is often very much linked to special educational needs and the interconnectionalities around there. So is it a perfect picture? No. Is there more we could do? Probably yes. And ideally well, but compared to other local authorities, I think we have some good stuff that we're doing here, but there is still more to do, and as we've seen through the growth in numbers since the pandemic.
I'm actually going to ask a couple more questions. I'm sorry. If anybody else wants to throw in a third. Sorry, it covers just such a broad, such a lot of ground, and it's like lots of work that we've been involved in for a long time. So I think there's a few questions that feel like they can't really go unasked in this public forum. So I think Councillor Tebbit-Doloff has a question, but if I may start us off asking a question around whether you can outline the process which Challenge has provided to schools with higher rates of school moves. In previous years, it had been noted that the Director of Education has visited these schools with other officers, but these visits have now been replaced by school improvement partners. I'm just thinking about the work that we're talking about, the Inclusion Charter, and about how any work that we were to do around inclusion, whether following up to schools that have higher numbers of school moves might be a way in which we might disseminate whatever it is that we are able to pull together in terms of the different strands of work that we've been doing. And also I have another question, sorry, around the 750 boys from the Orthodox Jewish community which are known to be missing education and a further unknown. Will the new requirements for parents to register their children who are electively home educated increase oversight? Do we anticipate that it will increase oversight? If officers wanted to take that, and then I think I've got Councillor Tebbit-Doloff and then Councillor Gordon.
Can I just say, in respect of the schools bill, there's still uncertainty as to whether that's actually going to go through or not. So it's hard for us to say whether it will have an impact because we're not convinced that it's going to see its way through to legislation. But if it does, it will absolutely have an impact on how we need to resource ourselves to be able to take into account the number of Haredi boys in particular who aren't in formal education.
Yeah, Paul.
And just following on from Jackie's comments with regards to the work of the schools bill, it is, dare I say, it's been kicked into the long grass at the moment, if I'm putting it candidly. And it's a case of the government are reevaluating priorities at the moment. Schools bill, we hear will come back around, but it will probably be a different iteration of what we've seen before. We are having conversations with our local head teachers and education system leaders, and we'll be ready to reevaluate what comes out the other side of the change process, and we'll have a mature conversation around opportunities and challenges within that, how best we can work collectively to progress that. But at this moment in time, we do have structures in place, meetings organised at our end. We have a regular programme of communication and meetings with our colleagues at the Department for Education, so we're in a position to receive the most timely updated information as well with regards to the bill. But at this moment in time, there is a slight impasse given the changes in national government.
Thank you. Chris, did you want to comment on the point about the school movement?
Yeah, so I mean, what that process looks like, I mean, the last couple of years I've been certainly involved with it. It's been done by the school improvement team. I mean, overseen by obviously the director of education as having that oversight of it. But it's very much a case of going in, talking to those head teachers, looking around. We get the data from the census data, so we know how many of the children that moved off, who those children are. Going in, talking to those head teachers, can the head teachers, do they know where those children have gone? Can they sort of, give a reasonable explanation as to where those children have ended up in terms of their destinations? Is that a reasonable outcome in terms of their destination? So, and I think in all the cases that we've had, we've spoken to those schools and they don't say, yeah, this child's gone to this school, they've moved to Manchester, or they've moved to, to Hampshire, or wherever it be, and they're in school in that place, or they've gone back abroad. So the head teachers could account for those decisions about where those individuals are. Then you have that broader discussions around, what's your processes, and it's very clear. And I think it was the point Andy was making earlier about you have those accountability measures around that. I think pretty much all our heads report those kind of movements now in terms of in terms of role movement, on roles, off role now to their governing bodies, so they have that oversight around it. And it was very clear talking to heads, they see it very much as that kind of movement, particularly as a safeguarding issue that came through. So that's kind of the process about how those conversations work. In terms of structure, it's about assuring ourselves around the children that have moved. Can the head teachers, have they got robust processes in place to underpin that? And having that two-way conversation around what that looks like.
Thank you very much for that, Chris. I've got Councillor Tebbit-Deloff and then Councillor Gordon. I think that will be the last two. Your turn.
Thank you, Chair. I might have misunderstood, but if I heard correctly, the higher level of incidents that leads to permanent exclusions are through behavior tensions, right? Is that what you said earlier? Sorry, behavior.
No, two-thirds of the permanent exclusions last year for one-off serious offences, mainly around possession of an offensive weapon, physical assault against an adult, or serious physical assault against another pupil, or sexual misconduct, or drug and alcohol related offences. So two-thirds of them were one-off serious offences. 1/3 were for persistent disruptive behaviour.
Oh, thanks. On the disruptive behaviour, maybe this is a very basic question, but I'm not sure whether each school has their own behavior policy. Like, I see nothing. This is because we hear cases of getting an detention for simple things like forgetting your pen, not wearing the right socks, which then leads to, again, a breakdown relationship because maybe your family cannot afford to buy that specific pen, and you get 2 hours detention and you stay home, you stay at school late, or you come later to do that, get home late and dark and cold. So I just maybe what I'm leading to with my question is there a universal for Hackney policy? And the answer, I think, is no. And is there perhaps now, Chair, just a need to review these policies so to know where these policies are perhaps a little bit heavy on children? Thank you.
If I can just come in again, Chris, because I feel like I've looked at so much exclusion data on Hackney, and what you're saying about serious one-off offences just isn't chiming with what I've read about what happens in Hackney. Are we referring to what happened quite specifically during that COVID year when we had a significant dip in exclusions? Is that if
I'm talking about our locally reported data for last academic year,
which was
the one that's just finished.
But then that was the year when we saw a huge slump, right?
That was the year before that. That was the COVID year. We went down to 6.
Okay.
Then last year we picked our locally reported data. We were back up to about 35, I think it is.
Okay. But historically, that's been the case, that it's been mostly serious one-off offences?
I think if you looked at probably, I've not dealt back, I would think you'd find probably persistent disruptive behaviour is probably the single biggest category. But I think you'd find probably one-off serious offences that probably count for the majority of exclusion, but they're often made up of half a dozen different types of categorisation going forward. But I can check that data and confirm it with you because I haven't got that immediately to hand.
That would be helpful, I think, because it's a very different situation, isn't it? If we're saying that actually 50 kids in the borough are being excluded each year because they're coming in school with a knife or having a knife outside, then that's a very different challenge that we're looking at there, aren't we? That's about youth violence in a way as well.
I mean,
but then the serious one-off offences, I think, it helps to inform.
I mean, if you want, I can give the Commissioner data for the last couple of years.
It would be helpful for because I think we have the data right up until the point that we did the exclusions report, which was obviously published last year, and to my knowledge, that did suggest that it was a lot of persistent rule breaking. But maybe it's about the categorisation that we're talking about and the going into the detail perhaps. Councillor Gordon, and then I think we will have to draw this item to a close.
Thanks, Chair. Slightly different focused question, but I think it sort of draws on some of the other themes that we've been looking at today, and also sort of in future work, is in relation to the in-year movements, as a result of parental choice. There's a fairly substantial number between primary schools of over 1,000 in-year movements. I mean, obviously these in-year movements are going to sort of reflect, sort of change the intakes in our primary schools, so that there's different intakes in our primary schools from the beginning of some schools, the beginning of the school to the end, and some schools will have falling roles, which has an impact on their funding and also their ability to do all these discretionary things in relation to school meals. I mean, I think I don't know, I mean, you've obviously got some data on that. You've asked parents why they're moving, but there's probably sort of slightly limited picture about why this is happening and who these are. I mean, this sort of movement between schools, and I think changes probably polarizes I'm sure it does polarize the sort of the children that are in different schools. So we've got some schools with children with more disadvantages on free school meals, and other schools which have got a different picture. So I don't know really whether you have done anticipate doing any other work, because I mean, I'm concerned about it from two levels really. I mean, partly from our sort of social cohesion point of view, but also in the impact on school funding, and some schools which will become financially fragile as a result of falling roles. I mean, I sort of could anticipate what Paul's probably going to say about this, but just wonder whether you've got any sort of other responses to that. And it's probably something we'll come back to. Thank you.
I think looking at the data and in terms of where school admissions ask the reasons, only around about a quarter of them were children moving from Hackney schools to other Hackney primary schools. The other 3/4, by and large, either had some other reason or were children who were moving into Hackney, or lived outside of Hackney but were choosing Hackney schools. So some of that may be moving from schools just over the border but choosing to come to a Hackney school, or some of them, a large chunk were newly arrivals from overseas. So the level of movement, say, at primary schools, there is some movement between our primary school and but that is not the substantial part of it. That accounts for about a quarter of them. The other 3/4 kind of for other kind of reasons. Obviously, the sheer level number of vacancies we have in our primary school estate, that does make that kind of movement very easy to some extent. And it one of the things that potentially helps fuel, I suppose, some of the movement around the system, because if it's very easy for parents to move, they will move around the system. Particularly, it doesn't take an awful lot. Say if you have a disagreement with the school, you can find another school place fairly easily. It's one of the challenges you have by having lots of vacancies in the system. It does make it easy for parents to move when they want to, but they only account for about a quarter of the actual moves around Hackney, and some of those will still be children who are moving from, say, the north of the borough to the south of the borough. So there may be a changes of address in some of those where actually you're moving to a school that is more convenient to your home address.
Thank you very much. I'm going to have to bring this item to a close now. Thank you so much, and in particular to the officers who've been with us throughout this evening. I think that's. I don't think we're going to need you for anything else. So please do feel free to leave. at this stage. But thank you very much for your contributions, and especially Paul, again, thank you for enduring your first, choose my words carefully, enduring your first Children and Young People Scrutiny Commission meeting. So moving on to item 6, which is our work programme. The updated work programme is included in the agenda at page 49 of the reports pack. Did you want to take us through any?
Do you want to highlight anything, or
No, I think.
If there are any questions, we can answer them.
Yeah, does anybody have any questions about the work programme?
Just one quick question. In November, we've got the SEND strategy coming to us, and it's just for 30 minutes for basically for noting and outlining where we're going to be scrutinising it, which I think we're again then doing in January. Or is it some of those elements? I'm just wondering if this commission's had a chance to scrutinise some of the development of that and maybe have some input. I don't, obviously being new to the commission, I haven't seen that, and I'm just wondering like how we're going to scrutinise that, you know, having not had that input, or if we get to contribute to the development of it after it's been agreed.
So the main focus for the SEND item was to scrutinise the action plan, because that covers, you know, that's what the SEND strategy will all be been agreed. I'll kind of scrutiny input, and that will be relatively minimal because it's going to cabinet this week. Well, sorry, this month, sorry. So the real focus is on the scrutiny action plan, which covers the implementation of the school estate strategy. It covers the kind of finance aspects. It covers the restructure incentive. It's the kind of what's happening in schools. So that's where we can have oversight and have keep track of the developments which are happening in that whole kind of SEND field. So we had to take it separately because the strategy, the action plan, is still being developed with partners. It's a partnership strategy. So we are going to take the SEND strategy in November after it's been to cabinet. So just to us to refresh what the kind of key themes of that SEND strategy are. But the real scrutiny value will come in January. And we will not just have our SEND team here, but we'll have our partners here as well, because it's ownership. So we need to be holding them all to account for the delivery of that SEND strategy across the kind of partnership as well. So that was the intention. We just it wasn't ideal how that kind of came about, but in some ways it's kind of, at least we get the kind of on the board what the SEND strategy is and the kind of key themes and what the executive are trying to do through that. I think is that. Councillor Wood, you might be able to remember better.
There's not much I can add to that. That's exactly right. We did, with SEND strategy, we did go through sort of parental engagement. There was consultation on it as it was developed. It's quite a simple strategy with sort of 4 priorities, but the action plan, there's like 10 work streams attached to that. And exactly as Martin says, you know, there's health partners, there are partners across the board that will come in, and hopefully there'll be a really good role for scrutiny to help us get that right.
Were there any other things that unless anybody else has any other questions about the work programme?
Chair, I just noticed on the January section where it says outcome of school inclusions, progressive recommendations. Are we going to have very important progressive recommendations on a cyclical basis so that things don't get lost in the ether?
That's how it usually goes for us. Yeah, so we'll keep reviewing usually annually until we get to a point where I suppose we're satisfied that things are embedded and progress is being made. But I do actually think that that's something that we might want to think about as a commission, because, you know, even just the length of time that I've been on the commission for, I feel that can be quite a bit of value in actually keeping things on the agenda almost indefinitely, but equally we then don't have the scope to look at other things. So it feels as though we might want to have a think about how we can continue that oversight when our work programme perhaps doesn't permit that sort of degree of scrutiny from us.
I think we sort of talked about it last time, but whether like there's more we can do about, not within the sit-down meetings, but written questions. So where we've had, for example, like an update provided to us being able to go back for a written response to come to us, not just the fluffy, this is what we've done against things, but the more specific equivalent of what like our key lines of inquiry stuff would be back. This is a way of kind of maximising the time we have here for other stuff, and making sure we're kind of pinning stuff down.
Thank you. So I think then moving on to the next item, which is the minutes. So the minutes of the last meeting held on the 29th of September were not ready for this meeting, will be published within the next meeting agenda papers. Item 8, any other business? No other business except the meeting of the next, the date of the next meeting is the 30th of November. I've just suddenly become distracted by hearing that it sounds like the heavens have opened just as we've decided to close this meeting, and we'll have to make our way home. But thank you to everybody, those of you joining online and those of you who stay for today's meeting, and have a lovely evening. No trick-or-treating, it seems. Good evening, bye.